Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I saw the footprints on my living room carpet as soon as I walked in. They were dark, damp, and clearly not from my own shoes. I had been out for about an hour, and I knew I had left the place clean before I locked the door. I stood there confused, staring at the tracks. There were about 4 distinct prints, like heavy boots caked with wet mud. I did not understand how anyone could have gotten in. The door was locked and the windows were closed. I felt a mild pressure in my chest and a slight tension at the back of my neck. I wanted to believe it was some weird mistake, maybe something I had done myself without noticing. I did not want to jump to any wild ideas. I took off my coat, tossed it on a chair, and approached the first footprint. I leaned down and touched the edge of the print with my fingertips. It felt damp, just wet enough to smudge. I sniffed it. It smelled like dirt and grass, like it came from the yard outside. I stood up and tried to follow the footprints. They led across the carpet toward the middle of the room, then made a slight curve and stopped. There was no sign of a turn toward the door or the hallway. They just ended in the middle of the room. I looked around. Nothing else seemed disturbed. The furniture was in place. The TV was off. The small table with the lamp was fine. The windows were closed. I locked the door behind me earlier, so I knew no one had opened it. I walked to the door and checked the lock. It was still secure. I checked the windows, all locked. I tried to think if maybe I had tracked something in earlier, but I had no mud on my shoes. The prints were too large and too heavy looking to be my own. They seemed to belong to someone else. I decided to clean them. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a wet rag and some carpet cleaner. I knelt down at the first footprint and started scrubbing. The mud came off slowly. It smeared a bit, but I pressed harder. As I rubbed, I heard a soft thump behind me. I stopped and looked back. Nothing was there. The room was quiet. I tried again. As soon as I put pressure on the rag, I heard another thump. This time it sounded like a heavy boot stepping onto the carpet somewhere behind the couch. I stood up and looked carefully. I saw a new set of footprints forming on the opposite side of the room. These were fresh, as if something heavy and wet had just stepped there. I felt a small surge of adrenaline. My mouth got dry. I did not want to accept what I was seeing. I walked over to the new footprints and stared. They had the same shape and size as the first ones. They formed a small circle on the carpet. I touched them and again felt that dampness. I looked around the room again. There was still nobody there. I did not hear any breathing. There was no sound of movement. But I knew I had heard something earlier. I tried a different approach. I stopped cleaning for a minute. I just stood there, silent, listening. I heard faint creaks in the floor, as if someone was shifting weight from one foot to the other. Then I heard a slow, deep stomp like a boot pressing firmly into the carpet. I stepped back and waited. Another stomp followed, then another. I followed the sound with my eyes, trying to spot any motion or any change in the carpet. After a few seconds, I saw it. The carpet fibers bent slightly as if pressed by something heavy. A new footprint appeared. I felt my heart pounding harder. My breath got shallow. I tried to stay calm. I told myself I had to figure this out. I wanted to see if there was a pattern. I walked around the room slowly, keeping my distance from the footprints. Each time I moved, I would see another footprint forming in some area of the carpet. They never formed close to my feet. They always appeared a few steps away, as if something was circling me. I decided to try cleaning again. Maybe I could remove them faster than they could appear. I got on my knees and scrubbed a fresh print. As soon as I cleared it, I heard a soft scraping sound on the other side of the room. I looked up and saw a pair of footprints forming side by side, like something standing still. I got up and headed there. When I approached, they vanished. Not by fading out, but by some trick of the light or my angle. I stepped back and they came into view again. I leaned in, and they were gone. I repeated this a few times. It was like they were visible only from a certain distance. I tried turning on more lights. I flipped every switch in the living room until it was fully lit. The footprints did not disappear. They were still there, scattered all over the carpet. Some formed wide arcs, others formed half circles. At one point I noticed a line of them near the coffee table arranged in a strange pattern. They overlapped in a tight curve, almost like a spiral. I could not describe it as pretty or meaningful. It just looked like a confusing cluster of muddy shapes. The smell of dirt and damp grass got stronger each time I approached them. I spoke out loud, even though I knew nobody was there. I said, "Who's here?" I said, "I don't know what you want." I got no answer. Just silence and then more footsteps. I heard a heavy step in the corner, then another near the couch, then one close behind me. I spun around. Nothing was there. I wanted to open the door and run out, but I also wanted to understand what was happening. I checked the door again to make sure it was unlocked in case I needed to leave quickly. I tried to catch the thing in the act. I stood in the center of the room and stared at the floor, waiting to see a footprint appear right in front of me. I waited for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Nothing. I relaxed a bit, but then I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air got colder. I could see my breath if I exhaled slowly. My hands felt clammy. I wiped them on my pants. Then I heard a long scraping sound, as if a boot was dragging across the carpet. I spun around and found a new line of muddy prints leading directly toward me. They stopped about a foot from where I was standing. I stepped back. My heart was beating faster now. I tried to find a practical solution. I thought about cleaning supplies, maybe something stronger. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a bucket, filled it with hot water, and mixed in some soap. I rushed back and poured water on the muddiest prints. I scrubbed hard with a brush. I used all my strength, focusing on erasing the prints as fast as I could. The carpet got soaked. The mud spread a bit, but I managed to fade some of the footprints. I stopped to catch my breath. The room was silent for a moment. Then I heard heavy steps again, this time louder and faster, like someone pacing back and forth. I turned and saw a flurry of fresh footprints forming near the door. They twisted around each other, crossing over the patterns I had just tried to remove. I tried to ignore the fear building inside me. My throat felt tight. I could feel sweat under my arms. I did not know what to do. I tried to think logically. Something invisible was walking in my living room, leaving muddy tracks. It seemed to react when I tried to clean. It seemed to move around when I tried to stand still. I decided to try capturing it on video. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I aimed the camera at the carpet, zooming in on a set of footprints. I spoke softly into the microphone, describing what I saw. As I recorded, I heard the footsteps again, circling behind me. I spun around with the phone. On the screen, I saw nothing unusual, just the empty room. But I could still hear those steps and see fresh footprints forming at the edges of the frame. I replayed the video. It showed the footprints that were already there, but not the new ones forming as I recorded. In the video, the carpet looked normal except for the marks I had not cleaned yet. I tried recording again while I focused on a spot where the footprints were appearing. The camera caught nothing but an empty carpet. When I looked away from the phone, I saw the footprints plain as day, but on the screen they were not visible. I felt frustrated and cornered. I tried to move the furniture. I lifted a small coffee table and moved it aside. The footprints curved around the space where the table used to be. I pulled the couch a few inches from the wall, hoping to catch something off guard. The footprints formed around the legs of the couch, as if walking around it. I tried to stand very still and listen carefully. The footsteps were slow now, steady, as if something was marking territory. Every time I got close to cleaning them, more appeared somewhere else. I tried using towels to blot out the moisture. I pressed down hard, absorbing the muddy water. When I lifted the towel, the footprint I cleaned was gone, but a new one showed up behind me. I twisted around and saw it forming as if pressed by a heavy boot. I grabbed a spare rug from a closet and tried covering the footprints. I unrolled the rug and spread it over the largest cluster. For a few seconds, everything was quiet. Then I heard a dull thud on top of the new rug. I pulled it back and saw a fresh footprint right there. It went straight through both layers, the old carpet and the new rug. I got angry and shouted, "Stop it!" I felt stupid shouting at empty air, but I had no other idea. My voice sounded shaky. I tried opening a window to see if fresh air would help. I slid the window up and a cold breeze came in. I looked outside, saw my yard, saw the grass and dirt. Nothing strange there. When I turned around, I saw a series of footprints leading straight from the front door to the center of the room, forming a careful path. They overlapped in a circle. I crouched down and examined them closely. They had distinct edges, like the sole of a heavy work boot. Each had little ridges and patterns. They were not blurry or faded. They looked completely real. I reached out and touched one print lightly. The mud transferred to my fingertip. I felt grit and small bits of debris. The footprints were definitely real mud prints. I wiped my finger on a rag. I tried to think about how this was possible. I knew I could not explain it. I tried to focus on what I could do next. I did not feel safe staying in the living room. I checked the hallway and bedroom. They were free of footprints. The phenomenon seemed limited to the living room. I considered leaving the house altogether. I thought about grabbing my keys and just walking out. But I worried about leaving the mess behind. Still, what could I do? The footprints kept forming no matter what I tried. I took a step toward the door and listened. The footsteps grew louder, as if something was protesting my move. I paused. The footsteps slowed down. I tried stepping back into the living room. The footsteps got faster. It was like the presence wanted me to stay. I felt my chest tightening. My breathing got shallow again. I said, "I'm not staying here." My voice sounded weak. I grabbed my coat and put it on. Before leaving, I tried one last time to wipe away a few prints by the door. I pressed a towel over them, soaking up the muddy water. Then I stepped back. A new set of footprints appeared right next to me, but I could not feel anything brushing against me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I stood still and clenched my jaw. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I told myself I would leave now. I headed for the door, unlocked it and pulled it open. A rush of cool air came in from outside. As I stepped over the threshold, I glanced back. The living room carpet looked like a battlefield of footprints. They twisted around each other, forming circles and lines. Some were faint from my attempts at cleaning. Others were dark and fresh. In the silence, I heard a single heavy step, as if the invisible presence was standing right at the edge of the carpet. It did not follow me past the door. It did not move onto the hardwood floor of the entryway. It stayed in the living room, continuing its endless pacing. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I stood outside with my back against the door. I still felt that tightness in my chest. I waited a few seconds, listening through the wood. I heard nothing. Maybe it only moved when I was inside. Maybe it was still there, stomping around. I did not want to check again. I stepped away from the house. My legs felt unsteady and I had a slight headache. I tried to calm my breathing. I walked to the driveway, stood under a light, and looked at my hands. They were shaking a bit, and I still had some mud on my fingertips. I rubbed them on my coat. I thought about going back in, but I knew it would be pointless. Nothing made sense in there. I got in my car, started the engine, and sat for a moment. I tried not to think about it too deeply. I tried to focus on what I knew for sure. There were footprints that appeared out of nowhere. They reacted to my presence. They did not show up on camera. They kept forming no matter how hard I cleaned. They behaved like someone walking inside my home, marking territory. I could not see who or what made them. All I knew was that I had to get out. So I did. I drove away, leaving the house with its strange footprints behind me. I remember the first time I heard it. It was past midnight and I was sitting alone in my living room trying to settle down after a long day. The room was quiet. There was no wind, no rain, nothing. Just silence. Then I heard a sharp ringing sound. It came from outside. It sounded like a small bronze bell. I had a bell out on my porch, a decorative piece I bought months earlier at a local shop. I never saw it move before, but now I heard it. It was ringing on its own. The sound was clear, high-pitched, and it didn't sound like it was swinging in a breeze. It sounded steady, intentional, like someone flicking it again and again. But there was no wind, no movement in the trees, no sign of anything that could have caused it. I got up, felt my legs tense, and walked toward the front door. I opened it and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was still. The bell hung from a thin piece of rope tied around one of the wooden beams. It was small, about the size of my fist, and made of a dull bronze metal. It did not move when I looked at it. The sound stopped the moment I opened the door. I held my breath and listened for anything unusual. There was nothing. I stepped closer, reached out and touched the bell. It felt cold. My fingertips felt a slight vibration, like it had just been moving. But it was still now. I looked around the yard. No one was there. The yard was dark, except for a single porch light. The gravel driveway was empty. The quiet bothered me, but I tried to ignore it. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to sleep. That night I heard something else around 2 in the morning. It was a scratching sound like fingernails on wood coming from the front door. I jumped out of bed and walked toward the door. My heart was pounding hard. I put my ear against the door and heard it again. A light scratch, repeated a few times, then silence. I opened the door quickly, shining my flashlight outside. Nothing. The bell looked the same. No footprints. No signs of animals. I stepped out, walked around the porch, and checked the yard. I didn't see anything that would explain it. I closed the door, feeling uneasy. It took me a while to sleep that night. The next night, I listened for it again. I sat in my armchair, facing the front door. Around midnight, the bell rang again. It sounded sharp and clear, repeating itself with a steady rhythm. I hurried to the door and opened it fast, hoping to catch someone in the act. The bell was swinging back and forth on its rope. I saw it moving. It wasn't just a sound. It was actually moving. There was no wind. I looked around. No one was out there. I grabbed the bell to stop its movement. It felt strangely cold against my palm, like metal kept in a freezer. When I let go, it stayed still. I waited outside for a few minutes, listening. The night air felt normal. Then I realized something. I felt a strange chill in my chest, not outside, but inside my body, like the sound had done something to me. I took a deep breath, shook my head, and went inside. I managed to fall asleep after checking the door and windows several times, but I woke up sweating when I heard the scratching sound again. This time it was louder, more insistent. I ran to the door and flung it open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. I saw no one, no animals, no branches touching the door. I stayed there for a while, listening to my own breathing. My heart was racing, and I felt a dull ache in my stomach. There was a slight breeze now, but it felt colder than normal. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it. Something felt wrong in the house. I couldn't explain it. The bell should not move on its own. On the third night, the bell started ringing earlier, around 10. I was in the kitchen washing dishes. The windows were closed. The weather was calm. I heard the bell, stopped what I was doing, and walked to the door. I kept the lights off inside, hoping to see something outside through the window without being seen. I moved a curtain aside. The porch light illuminated the bell's shape. It was moving again, swinging back and forth. The ringing sound came in short bursts, each one echoing in my ears. I noticed the temperature inside the room drop. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. My spine felt stiff. I tried to control my breathing, but I felt my chest tighten. I could see my shadow on the floor, cast by a lamp behind me. As the bell rang, my shadow seemed to shift. It looked distorted. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. But each time the bell rang, the shape of my shadow looked strange. like it bent at odd angles. It wasn't a trick of the light. The shadow was actually shifting in unnatural ways, sliding across the floor and stretching. I tried to ignore the shadow and focus on the bell. I decided to go outside and remove it. I put on my boots and jacket, took a pair of scissors, and stepped out. The bell kept ringing. I reached for it, and as I touched it, the ringing stopped. I cut the rope. The bell dropped into my hand, heavy and cold. I closed my hand around it and went inside. I placed it on my kitchen table and stared at it. It looked ordinary. I ran my finger along its surface. It felt smooth. There were no markings, no dents. I set it on a shelf in my living room. I thought maybe that would end it. But at around midnight, I heard the sound again. I rushed to the living room. The bell was still on the shelf. It was not moving. I was confused. I stood there listening. The ringing came from outside. I stepped onto the porch. The original rope was still tied to the beam, but there was no bell at the end. Yet I heard the ringing as if the bell were still there. I felt my head spin a little. I stepped off the porch and looked up at the beam. Nothing. But the sound persisted. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt sweat forming on my back. My fingertips tingled. I backed away, stumbling over the porch step. When I turned around to look at the door, I saw something move near the doorway. It looked like a dark shape low to the ground. I aimed my flashlight at it, and it vanished. I hurried back inside, locked the door, and checked the bell I had taken in. It was still on my shelf. I touched it. It felt like ice. After I put the bell in a drawer, hoping to block the sound, I tried to sleep on the couch. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up with a jolt. My entire body felt cold. My ears rang, not from outside, but inside my head. I stood up and looked around. The living room was dark. My lamp cast a dim glow. My shadow on the floor stretched across the room. It looked wrong again. I stepped closer to the wall to check if the angle of the light caused it. The shadow twitched as if it wasn't mine. I stepped back. My breathing got rough. I tried to calm down. I focused on what I could feel. The floor under my feet, the fabric of my shirt, the dryness of my mouth. I felt trapped. I opened the closet drawer and grabbed the bell. It was the same one I had cut down. I squeezed it in my hand. It felt heavy, as if it gained weight. I left it there and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My throat felt tight. Before I could drink the water, I heard a scraping sound on my front door. I froze, holding the glass. The scraping was slow, rhythmic. It sounded like something hard dragged across the wood. I tiptoed to the door and placed my ear against it. My heart thumped so loud I could hear it in my ears. I stood there for at least a minute, trying to decide what to do. I grabbed a baseball bat from beside the coat rack. I turned the lock and pulled the door open quickly. Nothing. I aimed my flashlight around. The porch was empty. I walked down the steps, circled the house, checked the driveway. I found no footprints, no broken branches, no signs of anyone. The air outside felt too still. My shoulders were tense, and my lower back hurt from the stress. I went back inside, double-locked the door, and pushed a chair against it. The next evening, I tried to distract myself by cleaning the house and playing some music. I kept checking the time. When it got dark, I turned on all the lights inside. I watched the porch from a side window. I could see the rope hanging there without the bell. Nothing moved. Around 11, I heard the bell inside my house. It sounded close, maybe in the living room. I rushed there and found the bell I had locked in the drawer lying on the floor. It looked like it had rolled out somehow. I picked it up. It felt colder than before. My fingertips burned from the cold metal. I placed it back inside the drawer and pushed a heavy box against the drawer. Then I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot. My lips were dry. My temples throbbed. I dried my face and tried to keep my mind steady. Minutes later, I heard a low creaking noise near the front door. I crept over quietly and looked through the peephole. I saw nothing. I placed my palm on the door's surface. It felt cold. I turned off the inside lights, hoping to see outside better. When I looked through the window, I saw my shadow cast on the floor again from a lamp behind me. My shadow shifted. I tried to ignore it. I stared outside. Nothing moved. Suddenly, the bell rang again. It was faint, but distinct. I pressed my ear to the window. The sound came from the porch area, even though the bell should be inside the drawer. I pulled the drawer open, checked the bell. It was still there. Yet I kept hearing it outside. I felt nauseous. My stomach churned. I closed my eyes, then opened them, trying to force my head to clear. I decided to remove the rope from the porch. Maybe that would help. I went outside with a knife and cut the rope from the beam. I shoved it into a trash bag and threw it in the garage. I locked the garage door. I returned inside and sat on the couch. I listened. For a while, there was only silence. My body relaxed a little. I drank some water. My hands shook and my forearms felt sore. I tried to stay alert. I glanced at the drawer with the bell inside and left it closed. Around 1 a.m, the temperature in the living room dropped again. I felt my teeth chatter. I could see my breath when I exhaled. The windows were closed, and the heater was on. There was no reason for it to be this cold. Then I felt a slight vibration under my feet, like someone tapping on the floorboards from below. I stood up and stomped my foot. The vibration stopped. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The silence pressed down on me. I rubbed my arms to warm up and walked slowly around the house, checking each room. Everything looked normal. But when I entered the bedroom, I smelled something metallic. It reminded me of old coins. I followed the smell to my nightstand. I pulled open the drawer. Inside, I found the bell again. I had left it in the living room drawer. Now it was here. I grabbed it and rushed back to the living room. I placed the bell on the coffee table. I didn't want it out of my sight. The bell sat there, silent and still. I watched it for a long time. My eyelids felt heavy and my head ached. After a while, I leaned back in the couch. My body felt weak. I tried to focus on the details around me, the texture of the couch fabric, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of dust in the air. That helped me stay grounded. Then, just as I started to relax, the bell rolled on the table by itself. It made a scraping sound against the wood. I froze. My chest felt tight again. I picked up the bell and held it in my hand. It was so cold it hurt. I threw it onto the floor. It hit the rug and didn't break. I kicked it across the floor. It stopped near the door. The moment it stopped, I heard the scratching sound at the door again. This time it was louder. I backed away. The doorknob rattled slightly. I gripped the baseball bat and stood still. I stared at the door and waited. The scratching continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I waited another minute, then approached the door slowly. I didn't open it. I just listened. My pulse throbbed in my ears. The bell on the floor began to rock side to side. It tapped the floor softly. My mouth went dry. I reached down and grabbed it again. I could feel my hands shaking. The metal felt heavier. I considered throwing it outside, but I wasn't sure what would happen. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and shoved it into a sealed plastic container. Then I put the container inside a metal box and placed it in the back of a cabinet. I returned to the living room and waited, holding the bat. Hours passed. I heard no more scratching. The air gradually warmed up. My shadow looked normal again. The rest of the night passed in silence, though I barely slept. When the morning light came through the windows, I felt exhausted but relieved. I checked the metal box. The bell was still there. I kept it locked away all day, never letting it out of my sight for too long. That night, I stayed in the living room, all the lights on, the metal box in front of me. I waited. The hours passed slowly. Just before midnight, I felt a chill. I heard the faint ring of the bell, but muffled, like it was trying to vibrate through the container and the box. My hands trembled. I felt sweat on my forehead. I steadied my breathing. The door remained quiet. The windows showed no movement outside. My shadow stayed normal. The bell's sound came again, weaker. I tightened my jaw and didn't move. Eventually, the ringing faded. The house remained quiet. I stayed awake until dawn. By morning, I felt drained, but the bell was silent. I kept it locked up. I waited another night and another. Each night, I expected it to start again, but it never did. The house stayed quiet and warm. The door didn't scratch. My shadow didn't change. The sound didn't return. I still have the bell locked away. I don't know why it happened. I don't know what caused it. I don't know who or what scratched at my door. Now I keep my windows closed and my porch empty. I don't hang anything outside. I stay vigilant at night. If I hear anything, I check right away. So far, I have heard nothing else. But I sleep lightly, always alert, because I can still feel that cold sensation in my chest when I remember the sound of that bell ringing in the dark. I walked into the small office space a few minutes past midnight. I had been there for most of the evening, handling spreadsheets and emails that no one else wanted to touch. The overhead light was too bright, and the place smelled stale, like old paper and coffee that had been left out too long. I rubbed my eyes and stared at my computer, feeling heavy and tired. The building was silent except for a distant hum from the ventilation system. I had turned off my computer's monitor a few moments earlier, planning to leave soon. That was when I noticed something strange. Even with the monitor turned off, I could see a faint reflection in the dark screen. It did not reflect my own office. Instead, it showed a dim room I had never seen before. It looked like a place without clear lighting, with old furniture and a large, round clock on the wall stuck at 3 o'clock. The glass on the clock face did not shine. The furniture looked dusty and heavy. There was a dresser or maybe a cabinet behind a chair. There was nothing modern about it. It was as if I were looking into another place entirely. At first, I leaned closer to the monitor. I squinted my eyes, trying to see if maybe I was just tired. I tapped the screen with my fingertip. It stayed black and cold under my touch, but the reflection did not change. I glanced around my own office. The walls around me were white with some cheap paintings. The door was closed. There were no old chairs, no old clocks, no dark corners. I had a standard desk and a few shelves with files. But in that monitor's reflection, I saw a narrow room. It reminded me of an old-fashioned study, like something you would see in a house built decades ago. I could not smell anything different. I could not hear anything from that reflection. It was just there, on the surface of the screen. I moved a little to the left and right. The reflection in the monitor shifted its angle, but it never showed my office. It only showed that other room. The objects in that room changed position when I moved, as if I were looking through a window into that place. I rubbed my chin and moved the monitor on its swivel stand. I rotated it slowly. No matter which way I turned it, the image remained the same. The unknown room always appeared, as if the monitor were a fixed window. I paused and stared hard. The old clock on the wall in that reflection read 3 o'clock. It was not moving. The second hand did not twitch. I watched it for at least 30 seconds. It never moved. I took a few steps back. I tried to see if the reflection was also visible from a distance. It was. I tried turning on and off my desk lamp. The reflection stayed the same. I reached behind the monitor and unplugged the power cable completely. The monitor should have been dead. Yet I still saw that room in its screen. I felt goosebumps on my arms. My scalp tingled. I shook out my hands and let out a slow breath. I told myself I was just tired. I had worked too long, and my eyes were playing tricks on me. I walked to the door and stepped into the hallway. The hallway was empty and quiet. I could see the glow of emergency exit signs at the far end. I came back to my office, hoping maybe the reflection would be gone. It was still there. The same angle, the same clock stuck at 3. As I watched, something caught my eye. A dark shape passed across the reflection. It moved quickly, like a figure walking through that other room. I leaned closer. I could not see details. It looked like a person-shaped shadow, maybe taller than me. There was no face I could make out, just a dark outline of shoulders and head. My heart began to pound. I said nothing. I just watched. After a few seconds, the figure passed again, this time from the other side. It moved behind the old chair. It was just a dark blur. I tapped the screen again, pressing hard, almost expecting it to go away. It did not. I tried to see if the figure would return. For a moment, there was nothing. Then it appeared again, standing near the clock. I could see it tilting its head. I moved my own head slowly to the right. A moment later, the figure did the same. I lifted my hand and waved once. The figure, with a slight delay, lifted its arm and mimicked the wave. I felt a tightness in my chest. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. I leaned to the side, bending my neck slightly. The figure in the reflection followed after a second or two, bending its neck as well. But it bent its neck further than I did, like it had no bones. Its neck went at an angle that made me feel sick. I stepped back from the monitor, almost stumbling. The figure straightened as well, slightly behind my movements. I turned my chair around, trying to catch it off guard. When I turned back to look at the screen, the figure had also turned, though slower, always with that delay. I moved my arms in a circle. The figure tried to do the same, but its arms seemed stiff. I tried not to think too much. I just wanted to understand what was going on. I ran my hand over the surface of the desk, searching for something that could explain this. I pulled the cables out of the computer tower. I unplugged the HDMI cable, the power cord, everything. The monitor had no connection. It should not show anything. Yet the reflection remained. The office air felt heavy. I could feel sweat gathering under my armpits. I tapped my foot on the floor, trying to ground myself. I could hear my own breath. I reached out and touched the black screen again. It felt cool, like normal glass or plastic. I stepped away, grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair and hung it over the monitor. I covered the screen completely. The jacket's fabric blocked my view for a second. Then I realized I could still see that strange room's light and shadows faintly through the fabric. It was as if the image was glowing through my jacket. I yanked the jacket away, tossing it aside. The reflection was still there, unchanged. I considered leaving right then, but I felt stuck. I kept trying to think of a reason for this. Some weird device, a prank. I touched the edges of the monitor, feeling for hidden cameras. I found nothing unusual. The frame was smooth. There were no extra lights or buttons. Just the same old monitor I had used for years. I picked up my phone from the desk and aimed its flashlight at the screen. The bright light from my phone shone on the monitor. I could see my own reflection for a split second, the way you normally would. But it quickly faded, and the old room came back. The figure now stood closer, as if at the front of that space, near where I would imagine the screen surface would be, if that place were real. I turned off the flashlight. The figure raised its arm slowly and tapped on something. I did not feel anything on my side. I just saw its arm rising and tapping in the air. I stepped backward until I hit the bookshelf behind me. I shoved some files aside and grabbed a thick binder. I moved it in front of the monitor to see if it would reflect in the screen. It did not. The old room remained, unaffected. The figure imitated me again, but it did not hold a binder. It just raised its empty hands in the same motion. My heart thumped harder. I could feel a slight tremor in my legs. My mouth felt dry. I wanted some water. I glanced at the small bottle on the desk. I picked it up, opened it, and took a sip. The water was lukewarm and tasted stale. As I drank, I watched the figure do a similar motion. Its hands moved toward where its mouth would be. I heard nothing. No swallowing, no breathing. Just silence. I tried speaking. I said, "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky in the quiet office. The figure's shoulders rose slightly as if it spoke too, but I heard nothing in response. I leaned closer again. The figure stood about as tall as me. It had a head and shoulders, but I could not make out a face, eyes, or any features. It was just a shape, dark and solid, but not detailed. I checked the time on my phone. It was about 12:30 a.m. I knew I was alone in the building. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. I tried looking away. I turned my back to the monitor and stared at the white wall, trying to think clearly. Maybe I could just leave. But my curiosity stopped me. I turned around again. The figure was now slightly off to the side in that reflected room. It looked like it was waiting for me to do something. I raised my right arm. It raised its right arm a moment later, but with a stutter, like a glitch. I moved my head in a slow circle. It tried the same, but its neck bent too far again. I felt my stomach twist. I pressed a hand against my abdomen, trying not to feel sick. I decided to test the limits. I took the monitor and lifted it off the desk. It was a bit heavy. I angled it upward, downward, sideways. The reflection never changed. It still showed that same old room with the stopped clock and old furniture. The figure stood there mimicking me. I reached behind and set the monitor down on the floor, facing the ceiling. The reflection still showed the room as if the monitor was facing forward. Gravity and orientation did not matter. I nudged the monitor with my foot. The figure, after a delay, moved its leg slightly, as if pushing something invisible. I got down on my knees and looked closely at the corners of the screen. The surface of the screen looked normal, but the image inside was stable. I knocked on the screen with my knuckles. I heard the dull tap from my side, but the figure did not react to the sound. It only reacted to my movements. I placed my palm flat against the screen and pushed. It felt solid. I saw the figure raise its own hand and push the air in front of it. I pulled back, stood up, and wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. I decided to try leaving the office. I grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys. I moved toward the door. As I did, I glanced back at the monitor. The figure followed me, moving sideways in its strange room, keeping me in view. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. The reflection was still there. The figure was still watching. I turned off all the lights in my office, leaving only the dim glow from the hallway. The monitor's screen still showed that dim old room, as if it had its own light source. The clock inside that room never moved from 3 o'clock. I stepped out into the hallway. From there, I could still see the monitor through the doorway. The figure stood near the chair, tilting its head. I walked farther down the hall. The reflection in the monitor's screen seemed to shift, as if somehow it still showed me from a different angle. I moved back to the doorway and peered in. The figure had moved closer to the front of the old room. Its shoulders were tense. I swallowed and stepped inside again. I thought about covering the monitor with something heavier. I grabbed a large cardboard file box and held it in front of the monitor's screen. The old room still showed through, as if the box were made of clear glass. I tossed the box aside, feeling frustrated. I pulled the monitor's cables out of the room entirely and hid them in a drawer, just to convince myself that it was completely disconnected. It made no difference. I considered calling someone. I pulled out my phone and dialed a coworker's number. It rang a few times, then went to voicemail. I whispered into the phone, asking him to call me back. I felt stupid trying to explain what was happening, so I just said I had an urgent question about a file. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My mind raced. I felt trapped and uneasy. But there was no immediate danger. The figure had not done anything to harm me. It only copied my movements, with that strange delay and those disturbing angles. I decided to try to ignore it. I walked to my desk and picked up the documents I had been working on. I closed my laptop and put it in my bag. I tried not to look at the monitor, but my eyes kept drifting back. The figure was still there. Now it was closer, as if leaning in. I could see it shift weight from one side to the other. I sighed, a quiet sound that only I could hear. My pulse was still fast. I wiped my hands on my pants and straightened my shirt. I moved slowly around the room and the figure copied me. I reached for my office chair and rolled it aside. The figure's hands moved as if pushing something invisible. I took a few steps backward, pressing myself against the wall. The figure backed away in its own space. The clock behind it never moved. The old furniture never changed. I watched for a long minute, doing nothing. The figure stood still. It seemed to breathe, but I could not hear anything. I just saw the slight rise and fall of its shoulders. I tried holding my breath and standing completely still. After a few seconds, the figure also became very still. I tried one last thing. I turned my back to the monitor and walked to the window. I pushed the blinds aside and looked out at the empty parking lot. I could see my car under a streetlight. I considered just leaving, but I wanted to know if this thing would follow me out of here. I looked back at the monitor. The figure now stood right in front of what would be the glass surface if that room were real. Its head was tilted down, as if looking straight into my eyes. I felt a strong urge to get away. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. Without looking away, I gathered my bag and walked slowly out of the office, keeping my eyes on the screen until I was in the hallway again. The figure followed my movements, stepping away from its furniture and following me to the edge of that reflected space. I stepped out of sight around the corner of the door frame. I stood there, breathing quietly, trying to calm down. I leaned into the doorway again to check the monitor. The figure had moved closer, as if trying to peer around the corner too, its head bent at a sharp angle. That was enough for me. I walked quickly down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the tile floor. I did not run, but I moved fast. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. I tapped my foot, waiting. When the elevator opened, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed. I stood there in the fluorescent light of the elevator, breathing carefully. I had left everything as it was. The monitor was still in that office, showing that strange room with the 3 o'clock clock and that figure. I reached the lobby, passed through the security door, and stepped out into the cool night air. I could feel my heartbeat slowing down. I walked to my car and got in. I did not look back at the building windows. I just started the engine and left. I turned on the TV that night and expected my usual channel lineup. I wanted some late-night movie or a quick news recap. Instead, I got a screen of white noise. I saw nothing but a mess of black and white speckles moving around. I tried changing the channel with the remote, but nothing happened. I aimed straight at the TV sensor, pressed the channel buttons, the volume buttons, the power button. Nothing worked. The remote's red LED flashed each time I pressed, so the batteries weren't dead. I tried the manual buttons on the TV itself, but they did nothing. The screen just stayed full of static. It bothered me, but I thought maybe the antenna cable was loose or something. I leaned behind the TV stand, checked the connections, tightened the coax cable, pressed the input button a few times. No luck. The screen remained a jittery field of static. I sighed, sat back, and stared. That's when I saw a shape form inside the flickering noise. I leaned forward, squinting. I couldn't make out details at first, just a vague pattern that didn't match the usual random static. It looked like part of a face. I moved closer. I could see the outline of eyes and a mouth. The mouth moved. I didn't hear any sound from it, but it was moving. The eyes seemed to blink. I looked behind me, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The living room was quiet. My couch, my coffee table, the dim lamp in the corner. Nothing out of place. I turned back to the TV. The face in the static drifted in and out of focus. Then it vanished, replaced by more random speckles. I rubbed my eyes. I tried to turn the TV off. The power button on the set did nothing. The remote did nothing. I even tried unplugging the TV from the wall. The screen went dark for a second, then flashed back on with static again. I plugged and unplugged it twice, maybe 3 times, but it refused to stay off. I felt the cord to see if it was hot. It wasn't. The back of the TV was slightly warm, which was normal. I tried pressing the power button again, holding it down. Nothing changed. I decided to leave the TV as it was. I thought maybe there was some kind of glitch. I checked my watch. It was after midnight. I told myself I would deal with it in the morning. I went to bed, but my mind kept returning to that face. I tried to sleep, but I kept seeing that faint outline whenever I closed my eyes. The next evening, I turned on the living room light before touching the TV. The static was still there. I picked up the remote and pressed random buttons. No result. I walked up to the TV and tried the buttons on the side again. They didn't work. The static moved and hissed. I turned the volume knob. At least the volume worked. I could raise and lower the hiss, but that was it. I settled back into my couch to see if the face would return. I sat for about 10 minutes, staring, waiting. Eventually, I saw movement. The static pulled together into another face. This time it looked different. The facial features were more distinct. I saw a pair of dark eyes shifting around. The mouth opened and closed, no sound. The face twisted to the side like it was trying to look beyond the edges of the screen. Then it faded, and I saw another face behind it. This second face had a more angular jaw. Its eyes were wide, its lips shaking. It also moved its mouth without making a sound. I tried to guess what it was saying, but the lips moved too fast. I leaned in, but it didn't help. I ran my hands over my arms. I felt a chill, even though the room was warm. I got up and paced around. I checked my other electronics. The lamp was normal. My phone was normal. My radio worked fine. Everything else was fine except this TV. I moved back in front of it and watched again. The faces took turns, one appearing after another. They seemed to be forming some kind of sequence, almost like a silent story. Each face looked upset, worried, or scared. Their eyes locked onto mine whenever they faced forward. Sometimes they shook their heads. Sometimes they pressed their lips tight. I didn't know what to think. By the third night, I accepted that something was very wrong. I had tried everything with the TV. I unplugged it all day while I went to work. When I came back that evening, I plugged it in again, hoping it would reset. It didn't. The static came right back as if it had never left. The faces started appearing sooner this time. I sat down, arms crossed, watching. The first face looked like a woman with short hair. She had a tense expression. She mouthed something. I could see her lips forming shapes like help, or maybe out. It was impossible to be sure. After her, a man's face appeared. He looked angry. His eyebrows were drawn together. He also mouthed words, but I couldn't catch any pattern. Another face replaced him after a minute, then another, and another. They came in a steady line. Each stayed on screen for about a minute, then dissolved into static, replaced by the next. I counted 5 faces that night before I got too freaked out and left the room. I tried sleeping in my bedroom, door closed, no lights. I listened for any sound. The TV made a faint hiss through the wall. I could ignore it if I tried, but my thoughts kept returning to those faces. They looked trapped. I wondered if the TV was picking up some weird broadcast. Maybe there was a signal leak from somewhere, or maybe some kind of interference. But why wouldn't the TV turn off? Why couldn't I change the channel? The next night, I decided to try something else. I brought home an old set of rabbit ear antennas I had in the garage. I hooked them up to the TV, fiddled with them, and tried scanning for channels. No response. The TV didn't react. I tried pressing the scan button. Nothing. I tried holding the power button for a full minute. Nothing changed. The static stayed the same. I tried turning off the main power to the living room. I flipped the circuit breaker. The entire room went dark, including the TV. I sighed, relieved. I flipped the breaker back on. The lights returned and the TV screen lit up again with static before I even touched the power button. It was as if it had a mind of its own. I grabbed a blanket and a pillow and set them down in front of the TV. I wanted to watch for a longer period, see if I could understand what was going on. I turned off every other light in the apartment except one small table lamp behind me. I didn't want to sit in the dark. I took a snack bar and a bottle of water. I sat leaning forward, eyes fixed on the screen. The faces returned. They came in a specific order. First, the woman with short hair. She looked directly at me. Her mouth moved slowly this time. I watched her lips form shapes. I thought I saw something like, "I see you." I couldn't be sure. Then she faded out. The next face was the angry man. He had a thick neck and a tense jaw. He mouthed words with rapid movements. I tried to focus on his lips. I think he said, "Help us" or "Get us out." I felt my heart pounding. I pressed my palms together. I leaned closer. He stared at me, his eyes wide. Then he vanished. A third face came up. This one looked older, with lines around the eyes. It mouthed something longer. I couldn't guess the exact words. It repeated the same phrase again and again, but I couldn't hear anything. The static hissed quietly. My breathing sounded loud in my own ears. I felt a pressure in my chest. After a minute, that face disappeared too. Then I saw a fourth face, a younger-looking man with short, dark hair and a narrow face. He mouthed very slowly, as if he was trying to make it easy for me. I focused hard. I tried to read his lips. I think he said, "We are stuck." I blinked and swallowed. My throat felt dry. The face said it again, I was sure. "We are stuck." Then he vanished. A fifth face appeared. This time it was the same woman from the start, but she looked more scared. She mouthed different words now. I watched carefully. I think she said, "Change the channel." I tried pressing the remote again, but nothing happened. I tried pressing the TV's side buttons. Nothing worked. I gripped the remote hard, pressing every button. The face watched me do this. The lips kept moving, repeating the same phrase. She looked frustrated. I shook the remote, slapped it against my palm. Nothing. I spent hours that night watching these faces cycle through. Sometimes they repeated the same words. Sometimes they looked around inside the static, like they were trapped behind some barrier. My eyes grew tired. My neck started to ache. I got up to stretch, went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, came back. The TV still showed static, and the faces still appeared at regular intervals. I tried turning the TV around. I physically grabbed it and rotated it on the stand. The screen still showed the same thing. I tried plugging it into a different outlet. No difference. I considered throwing the TV out, but it was heavy, and I lived alone. It was late at night, and I had nowhere else to put it. The idea of smashing it crossed my mind. I wondered what would happen if I broke the screen, but I hesitated. I didn't like the idea of broken glass all over my living room. Also, I wasn't sure if it would make things worse. I decided to wait and see. Over the next few nights, the pattern continued. The faces appeared in the same order. They tried to communicate. I tried different approaches. I tried writing down what I thought they were saying. I tried responding out loud, telling them I couldn't understand. Of course, they didn't respond to my voice. They just stared and mouthed their silent pleas. I felt tense all the time. My shoulders were sore from sitting hunched forward, staring. My head hurt from the effort of trying to read their lips. I didn't know what they wanted, beyond the vague message of being stuck or wanting me to change the channel. I couldn't change the channel. The TV wouldn't let me. I couldn't turn it off either. I started sleeping in the guest room. I left the TV alone at night, hoping it would shut off by itself. It never did. I would wake up, walk into the living room in the morning, and the static would still be there, the faces still waiting. They didn't react when I came in. They didn't show any sign of noticing the time of day. It was always the same silent pleas. I began to worry about my power bill. The TV was on nonstop. I tried cutting off the power at the breaker each night. That turned it off, of course. But the moment I restored power, the TV came back on with the same static. The faces resumed their pattern, as if no time had passed. After about a week of this, I started feeling desperate. I grabbed my toolbox. I intended to open the TV's back panel and see if I could disable something. I turned off the breaker, unplugged the TV, and set it face down on the floor. I unscrewed the back panel. Inside, I saw the normal circuit boards, wires, and components. Nothing unusual. I unplugged the main board from the panel. Then I reassembled everything, hoping that would break its strange behavior. I plugged it back in, turned on the breaker. The TV lit up with static again. The faces appeared just as before. I felt sweat on my forehead. My stomach felt tight. I paced around my living room, thinking what else I could do. I decided to bring an old television from my bedroom and set it next to the strange one. I plugged in the second TV and turned it on. It worked fine. I had normal channels on that one. I flipped through them. Everything was normal there. I looked at the strange TV. It still showed static and faces. I tried to connect the two TVs with a cable, thinking maybe I could transmit something. Nothing worked. That night I sat in front of the TV again, watching. The faces came and went, each one mouthing words I couldn't fully understand, but I kept trying. After a few hours, I think I understood part of their message. They wanted me to do something to free them. They repeated something about changing the channel, turning something off, or letting them out. I pressed the remote's buttons again, harder this time, and felt a kind of panic. The faces stared right at me. They looked angry now. Their expressions were tense. Their eyes darted around. The older man's face appeared again. His lips said something new. I think he said, "Break it." I glanced at the TV screen. The older man repeated it. "Break it." I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a hammer. I hesitated with the hammer raised, looking at the screen. The faces stared at me. They all mouthed, "Break it," one after another, cycling through. My hands shook. I swung the hammer at the screen. It cracked, sparks flew, the image flickered. I hit it again. The TV went dark. I took a step back. The TV was broken, the glass shattered, the circuit boards exposed. I waited, breathing hard. There was only silence. No static, no faces. I touched the broken edges carefully. They were sharp. The TV was finally off. I moved it out of the apartment the next day, carrying it out to the dumpster behind the building. I felt tired and relieved. That night I watched my old TV in the bedroom. Normal channels, normal sound, no static. I switched channels without any problem. I didn't see any faces. I slept better. I never figured out what caused it. I never saw those faces again. The apartment felt normal afterward. Sometimes I remember those silent mouths moving in the static. I remember how they seemed desperate. But I don't have that TV anymore. I don't have to see them again. My living room is quiet at night now. I keep the new TV off unless I need it. I don't take any chances. I open my eyes and look around my living room. My bookshelf stands against the far wall. It is an old wooden shelf with uneven edges. Yesterday I cleared it out. I packed every book into 2 cardboard boxes and carried them to a local donation center. I remember the weight of those boxes cutting into my hands and the sound of them scraping against the trunk of my car. I remember handing them over to a volunteer who stacked them on a metal cart. I remember driving home, relieved to have more space in my apartment. But now, as I stand here this morning, the shelf is full again. It is not only full, it is packed in exactly the same way as before. The titles are not all the same, though. Some look familiar, but others are strange. My name appears on some spines. I step forward and smell something like burned parchment. I hesitate, and then I reach out and slide one book free. Its cover shows a face that looks like mine, but twisted, with the features slightly off-center. The eyes seem smaller and too close together. The mouth is stretched into a thin line. I open the book and flip through a few pages. The words inside describe my actions from yesterday, things I know I did. They describe me packing boxes, driving downtown, and leaving the books at the donation center. The language is dry and flat, but there is a tone that makes me uneasy. I snap the book shut and put it back. I walk into the kitchen. I try to ignore what I saw. I wash my face at the sink. The water is cold. I dry off with a rough towel and then stand there, leaning on the counter. My heart beats a little harder than usual. I go back into the living room. The shelf is still there, filled with those books. I pick up another one. Its spine is cracked. The pages smell like a mix of old paper and something burnt. The title is my last name followed by a colon and some strange phrase that references a small routine I performed last night, like Smith, cleaning the stove. I did clean the stove last night. I do not remember that title from my old collection. I flip through it. It describes the moment I bent down to scrub the burner pans. It mentions how my back felt stiff. It mentions the exact time I did it. I shut the book and put it back. I do not know what is happening. I try to stay calm. I look around my apartment. Everything else seems normal. My couch is in the same spot. My TV is still off. The sun is shining through the window in the same way it always does. I step closer to the shelf again and put my hand on it. It feels solid. The wood is smooth but old. I pull out one more book. The cover shows my face again, but this time it looks more distorted. The eyes are lower on the face and the mouth is too large. I feel a lump in my throat. I do not like looking at that face. I open the book and it describes me standing here right now. It describes me reading this book. It describes the way my heart is beating faster. It describes the sweat on my palms. I flip to another page. It continues to describe my current actions. It mentions my breathing and the pressure in my chest. I slam it shut and put it back. I step backward until I bump into my coffee table. I rub my eyes, trying to think. I want to make sure I am not imagining this. I go to my phone and check the time. It is still early. I pick up my keys and decide to leave for a while. I put on my jacket and head outside. The day is quiet. I walk down the street, buy a coffee, drink it fast, and toss the cup in a trash bin. I return home after about 20 minutes. I open my door and look at the shelf again. Everything is the same. I pull out a random book. Now it shows a different scene from my life. It describes me standing outside, drinking coffee, looking at the sidewalk. I feel a cold sensation on the back of my neck. I feel like I am being watched, but I do not see anyone else here. I slide the book back. I sit down on my couch and face the shelf. I do not know what to do. Yesterday I donated all these books. Today they are back and now they are different. I stand up and walk over to the shelf. I take a stack of books, about 10 of them, and put them into a plastic bag. I carry them outside and place them in my trunk. I drive them across town and toss them into a donation bin behind a thrift store. I watch them slide out of my bag and drop into the bin. I close the lid, get back in my car, and head home. When I enter my apartment, the shelf looks empty for a second and I feel a bit better. But after I walk into the kitchen and return, the shelf is full again. The same books are back, as if I never took them away. I feel my stomach tighten. I rub my face and stand there, breathing through my nose and out through my mouth. My chest feels tight and my arms are tense. I try another tactic. I grab a box from my closet and fill it with books from the shelf. Then I carry this box down the hall to the building's trash room. I dump them into the cardboard compactor. I watch them fall in and land on top of other discarded boxes. The smell of the trash room is strong and sour. I hold my breath and leave quickly. I hurry back to my apartment. As soon as I enter, I see the shelf is full again. The books do not look damaged at all. They stand there, waiting. I approach them and pull one out. Now it describes me dumping books into the compactor. It describes my tense shoulders and the sound of my footsteps in the hallway. I slam it back in place. My hands feel shaky. My forehead feels damp. I wipe it with the back of my hand. I do not know how they keep coming back. They appear without a sound, as if the shelf never empties. I try not to think too hard. I try just to do something else. I turn on the TV. I watch a game show for a few minutes. The sound distracts me. I go into the kitchen and make a sandwich. I eat it standing at the counter. I notice that my hands tremble slightly as I lift the bread to my mouth. I turn off the TV and glance at the shelf again. It is still full. I turn away. I decide I will not look at it. If I cannot solve it, I will ignore it. I pick up my phone and start scrolling through messages. I do not tell anyone what is happening. I have no idea how to explain it. I stand in the middle of my living room for a while. My knees feel a bit weak. I can smell that strange burnt odor in the air. It reminds me of old paper left too close to a flame, but nothing is burning here. I check the kitchen stove. It is off. I check the outlets. Everything seems fine. I leave again. I walk around the block. I count my steps. I look at the cars parked along the curb. I look at the storefronts. Everything feels normal outside. I return to my apartment and the shelf is still there, of course, and still full of those books. I pull one out to see if something has changed. Now the book describes me walking around the block. It mentions the sound of my footsteps on the pavement and the distant hum of traffic. It also describes me refusing to look directly at the shelf before leaving. The details are correct. I push the book back, and I feel my chest tighten again. I swallow, and my throat feels dry. I try to rearrange the books. I place them in a different order. I push some to the left and some to the right. I leave a gap in the middle. Maybe in the morning I will see if they rearrange themselves. I sit on the couch and watch the shelf. It is quiet. The spines show my distorted face in various positions. Some faces have a crooked nose or a tilted jaw. Some have eyes that do not line up. I do not know why they look like me, but they clearly do. The resemblance is close enough to make me uncomfortable. I rub my arms to warm up. I feel cold. I lean forward and sniff the air again. That burnt smell is still there, not strong, but persistent. I pass the afternoon in silence. I avoid making any sudden moves. I'm afraid if I do something else unusual, a new book will appear describing that action. I try to read a few pages from a random book, but the words describe my movements from earlier in the week. There is no analysis or explanation, just a list of what I did, what I wore, what I touched. I flip through quickly and it all matches my memory. I drop the book onto the floor. I pick it up again, and the spine feels warm. I check the shelf and see if any books have disappeared. They have not. Everything looks the same. As evening comes, I turn on a lamp. The soft light does not change anything. I can still see the books staring back at me with their strange covers. I try putting on music to drown out my thoughts. The music helps a bit. I focus on the rhythm. I focus on the hum of the refrigerator. After a while, I realize I need to rest. I do not want to look at the shelf at night. I am afraid of what I might see if I wake up. I consider sleeping in another room, but my apartment is small. The living area and the kitchen are connected. My bedroom is just down the short hallway. I can still smell the books from my bedroom if I leave the door open. I grab a towel and shove it under the bedroom door. I want to block that smell. I shut the door and sit on my bed. I can still feel my heart beating harder than normal. My shoulders are tense. I crack my knuckles and try to calm down. I do not know what else to do. I turn off the light and lie down. The mattress feels too soft. I keep thinking about the shelf. I do not sleep well. I wake up several times during the night. Each time I wake, I wonder if the books are changing at that exact moment. In the morning, I open the bedroom door slowly. The smell of burnt parchment is still there. I step into the living room. The shelf is still full, just as before. I check the arrangement of the books. They are back to their original positions, as if I never touched them. I try removing one book and flipping through it. It describes my restless night. It describes me getting up, pacing in the bedroom, and returning to bed. It also mentions my rapid breathing and my heartbeat. I drop the book and step back. I rub my face. I notice I am sweating again. I consider taking the entire shelf outside. I try to lift it. It feels heavier than before. The wood does not budge. I try again, pushing from underneath, but it is stuck. The shelf will not move. I feel a slight panic rising. I step back and think about removing the books first. I pick them all up and stack them on the floor. The shelf is empty now. I try to lift it again. It will not move. The shelf feels anchored to the wall even though I can see it is not attached by screws. I put the books back onto the shelf, not knowing what else to do. After I place them back, I notice new titles mixed in. The new titles describe these last few minutes. They mention me attempting to lift the shelf. They describe the expression on my face, the position of my hands, the pressure in my joints. I walk into the bathroom and splash water on my face. The water is cold. I stare at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes look tired. I dry off and return to the living room. The books are still there. I pick up a trash bag and try stuffing them inside once more, but as soon as I turn my back, I hear a quiet rustling. I spin around, and the books are already back on the shelf. I did not see them move. They are just there. I feel a sudden pressure in my chest. My hands feel clammy. I wipe them on my pants. I think about calling someone, maybe a friend, but I'm not sure what to say. I sit on the couch and stare at the books. The smell of burnt paper is all around me. My throat feels dry and scratchy. I swallow hard. The rest of the day passes slowly. I try not to do anything that might be recorded in these pages. I stand still and breathe slowly. I cannot hold that position forever, though. Eventually, I move around, eat something, use the bathroom, and return. Each time, the books seem to record it. I flip through a few and see my actions described. There is no judgment or commentary, just a cold record of everything I do. I go to bed again. The next morning it is the same. The shelf is still there and the books are still fresh. Some have new covers, each one showing my face in a new distorted way. Some faces have narrowed eyes, others have a lopsided jaw. I feel uneasy. My stomach feels tense. I avoid looking at them directly. I keep my eyes lowered when I pass by. When I leave the apartment, I feel relief. When I return, I feel tension again. After a few days of this, I stop trying to remove them. I stop donating them or throwing them away. They always return. I focus on living around them. I keep my distance. I try not to touch them. The odor never leaves, but I get used to it. I watch TV, eat meals, and sleep with the door closed. I do not read them anymore. I pretend they do not exist, even as I smell their presence and feel their weight in the room. I never figure out why they come back or what they want. They just stay there. Over time, I accept the shelf as it is, always full, always recording, always describing. I avoid eye contact with the covers. I do not speak to anyone about it. I do not want anyone else to see it. I live here, day by day, ignoring the books and their quiet, steady presence. They know everything I do, but I have no way to stop them. I just breathe, move through my routines, and go on. I noticed it about an hour after everyone else left. I had stayed late to finish a set of reports. The office was quiet. The lights were still on, but the hallway was empty, and I knew the cleaning crew wouldn't arrive for another couple of hours. My watch read a little after 8:30 p.m. The place felt still. I heard no voices, no phones ringing, no printers humming. There were only the usual soft sounds, the air conditioning blowing through vents, the distant hum of the soda machine near the break room, and the gentle creak of the old office chairs whenever someone leaned back. But I was alone. That was the point. There was no one else inside. My desk faced the interior of my small office. In front of it was a padded black leather swivel chair. It was not the chair I used. It was an extra chair for visitors. I rarely had visitors, so it usually sat pushed against the wall, facing halfway toward my desk. I had worked in the same room for months, and I never noticed anything strange about that chair. It was just a piece of furniture. But that night, I had a feeling something was off. I first heard a slow, soft sound. It came from somewhere near the wall. It sounded like a chair turning on its base. The swivel mechanism had a certain noise, a dry, quiet scraping that happened when someone turned it while seated. I looked up. The chair was where I had left it still. It faced the wall, angled slightly toward my computer monitor. I stared at it. It did not move. I told myself I must have imagined the noise. I shrugged and went back to typing. A few minutes later, I heard it again. It was the same noise, a tiny squeak and scrape that made me think of someone slowly twisting in the chair, adjusting position. I stopped typing. I listened. No other sound came. I turned my head. The chair looked exactly the same as before. I narrowed my eyes and watched it. The seat, the back, and the armrests were still. I looked at the angle of the seat cushion in relation to my desk. It was angled a bit differently now. I felt certain it had faced my desk more directly before. But I couldn't prove it. Maybe I misremembered. I returned to my work. A moment later, I heard the squeak again. I looked up fast. The chair had stopped. It was still. The angle seemed different again, maybe half an inch more toward the filing cabinet. I stood up and approached it. I touched it to see if it was loose, but it felt normal. I grabbed the back and twisted it a bit. It made the same sound I had heard. I let go. The chair stayed where I placed it. I backed away, keeping my eyes on it. If it was moving, I wanted to catch it. I stood there for at least a minute, just staring. Nothing happened. I decided to test it. I turned my back on the chair and pretended to fiddle with some papers. I stopped breathing loudly so I could hear every small sound. After a few seconds, I heard that quiet scraping again. I spun around. The chair was still, but now it definitely pointed toward a bookcase in the corner. I felt my heart beating faster. I could feel a slight tightness in my chest. My forehead felt warm. I took a step closer and bent down, checking the chair's wheels. They were not rolling. The base was steady. Nothing should have caused it to move. There was no draft strong enough to turn it. The air conditioning vents were on the other side of the room. I tried tapping the floor. It was solid. No vibrations. I stepped back and decided to ignore it. I figured I was tired and my mind was playing tricks. I walked over to my desk and started typing again. After a few minutes, I heard it. The same sound, very soft, like metal rubbing lightly. I kept my eyes on the keyboard and listened. The noise came in short intervals, like the chair turning a few degrees at a time. I spun around quickly. The chair stopped moving again, facing the bookcase in a different way. It was a few inches further along its rotation, now pointing at the second shelf from the top. I walked over to the bookcase. I looked at the shelf the chair seemed to face. There were old binders, some reports from past years, and a row of manuals that I never touched. Nothing unusual. I glanced back at the chair and frowned. I felt unsettled. I pulled one of the binders out and flipped through it. The pages were old reports, boring and standard. I pushed it back in place and waited. When I turned away, I heard the chair again. This time I turned around slowly, trying not to startle it, as if it were a living thing. It still managed to freeze the moment I looked at it. Now it faced slightly down toward the bottom drawer of my file cabinet. My mouth felt dry. I felt a light pressure in my stomach. I went to the filing cabinet and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were old files. Nothing I needed. I pushed them aside, checking if something felt strange. I saw no hidden compartments. I closed the drawer and looked back at the chair. I spoke quietly, though I'm not sure why. "What do you want?" I said. It made no sense to talk to a chair, but I did it anyway. It did not respond. It remained still. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I placed my elbows on the table and stared at the chair. I wanted to see if it would move while I watched. I waited a good 10 minutes. My eyes started to burn a bit from not blinking enough. The chair stayed in place. No sound, no movement. I got up and walked around the chair, inspecting every part of it. I felt the fabric, the armrests, the wheels. Everything looked normal. I decided to try another tactic. I would stand facing away from the chair, but watch it in the reflection of my computer monitor. The monitor was off, and I could see a faint reflection of the room in the dark screen. I positioned myself so that the chair was visible over my shoulder. I pretended to focus on a stack of papers on my desk. I tried not to move my head. I listened. I heard nothing at first. Then I caught a subtle shift in the reflection. I could not see details, but I sensed a small change. I whipped my head around. The chair froze again, but now it faced the wall near the door. I walked to that wall. There was a tiny crack in the paint near the corner, just above the baseboard. I ran my fingernail over it. It felt like a thin line in the drywall. I pushed it a bit. It didn't open, but I felt something loose behind the paint. Maybe it was just old plaster. I got a small screwdriver from my desk drawer. I pressed the tip against the crack and pried gently. A small piece of drywall crumbled away, revealing a narrow gap. Inside, I saw a folded piece of paper tucked into the cavity. I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a note with a few lines of text and a rough diagram of the office layout. The handwriting was small and shaky. It made no sense to me. It mentioned a cabinet and some reference numbers, but nothing else. I turned to the chair. It faced me directly now, as if it watched me hold the paper. My heart was pounding harder. I felt sweat on my back. I dropped the note on my desk and decided to see what else the chair would point to if I gave it time. I stood near the window with my back to the chair. After a while, I heard the scraping. I turned and saw it now face the top drawer of my desk. I opened that drawer. Inside were pens, sticky notes, a stapler, and a small locked metal box that I had never bothered to open. I didn't know where the key was, and I never needed anything inside it. It had been left there by someone who occupied the office before me. I shook it. It rattled. I wanted to open it now. The chair clearly wanted me to notice it. I searched my desk. I looked under it, checked behind the computer, pulled out all the drawers. After a few minutes, I found a tiny key taped to the underside of my pencil holder. I tried it on the box. It opened. Inside were 2 old keys and a folded piece of fabric. The fabric was plain. The keys looked like they belonged to some old lock, maybe a storage closet. I looked at the chair. It faced the door now, as if telling me to try these keys somewhere else. I left my office and walked down the hall. I tried one of the keys on the supply closet door. No luck. I tried the other key on the locked cabinet in the small records room next door. It fit. I opened the cabinet and found boxes of old client documents I had never seen before. Nothing unusual jumped out at me, but I noticed that some folders had the same reference numbers mentioned on the note I found behind the crack in my wall. I pulled out one folder. Inside were old receipts, printouts of email exchanges, and a list of names. I recognized a few names as former employees who had left long ago. None of this explained the chair or what it wanted. I returned to my office. The chair now faced the door as I walked in, then slowly turned a few inches to face the area under my desk when I looked away for a second. I got on my knees and checked under the desk. There was a loose floorboard. I pried it up with my screwdriver. Underneath, I saw nothing but concrete and dust. No hidden items. I felt confused. I stood up and looked at the chair. My breathing was fast. My hands were shaky. I turned off my overhead light, leaving only my desk lamp on. I tried to approach this step by step. The chair responded to my lack of direct attention. It guided me to a hidden note, a locked box, and some old files. Everything seemed connected to people who worked here long before me. I tried leaving the room again. When I returned, the chair faced the window. I checked the window frame carefully. I ran my fingers along the edges. I found a small, flat piece of metal wedged behind the left side of the frame. It looked like a thin blade or a lever. I pulled it out. It was just a scrap of metal. I placed it on my desk. When I looked back at the chair, it faced my phone. I picked up the phone. The line was dead at that hour, or so I thought. I listened. There was only a dial tone. I dialed my own cell number. It rang normally. I hung up. The chair seemed to lose interest in the phone once I tried that. It turned back toward the bookshelf when I looked away. I pulled out more binders, checked behind them, ran my hand along the back panel of the shelf. I found a small indentation. I pressed it, and the back panel popped loose. Inside was a stack of old photographs. They showed some people standing in this very office, holding documents and shaking hands. I recognized a few faces from company newsletters. Nothing illegal or strange stood out, just old business images. I slid them back, feeling no progress. It was almost 10 p.m. now. I was sweating. I wanted to leave, but I also wanted to understand what was happening. I decided to confront the chair directly. I placed it in the center of the room, facing my desk, and I stood behind it. With my eyes off it, I heard the faint scraping again. I looked down. The chair froze. Now it faced slightly to the left. I inched away and did it again. This time it rotated a bit more. I tried repeating this until it pointed at something specific. After a few attempts, it pointed toward the ceiling vent. I got a ladder from the storage room. I climbed up and removed the vent cover. Inside the duct, I found an old envelope taped to the side. I pulled it out and opened it. It contained a list of passwords and codes. They looked like old security codes for locked rooms and some encrypted passwords. These were outdated and useless now. But maybe they had meant something to whoever put them there. I felt frustrated. The chair showed me random things: notes, keys, files, photos, and codes. I stood in the center of the room again. I glared at the chair, facing it directly. It remained still and quiet. I circled it. I touched its armrests. The leather felt smooth and cool. I pressed my ear against the backrest. I heard nothing. I left the office door open and walked a few steps into the hallway. I turned my head slightly so I could see the chair's shape with my peripheral vision. After a few seconds, it rotated again, pointing toward the crack in the wall where I found the first note. I realized it was just doing this when I looked away. Maybe it had no goal. Maybe it was only responding to my actions, always leading me to something else. I felt my throat tighten. I did not want to stay any longer. I already had enough strange evidence. I stuffed the notes, the keys, and the photographs into my briefcase. I flipped the chair so it lay on its side. It could not swivel now. I felt calmer seeing it unable to move. I turned to leave. I heard no scraping. I left my office, locked the door, and walked down the quiet hallway. I heard my footsteps echo. I felt a slight trembling in my legs and a tension in my neck. The building was silent. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. While waiting, I glanced back toward my office door. It was closed. I imagined the chair on its side, unable to turn, surrounded by the scattered papers and open drawers. I stepped into the elevator. My heart still beat fast. I thought about what I found. They meant nothing obvious to me. I had no intention of discussing it with anyone. I just wanted to go home. The elevator doors closed, and I reached the ground floor. I walked outside into the empty parking lot. There were no strange noises, no odd movements. I got in my car and drove away, leaving the chair behind. I knew it was still there, flipped on its side, stuck in that office. I planned to return in the morning and see if it stayed that way. I doubted anyone would believe me. I did not care. At least now I was outside, away from that quiet scraping sound and the slow turning that I could never catch with my eyes. I remember the first time it happened. I had just moved into a small apartment on the third floor of an older building. It was late at night. The apartment was quiet, and the overhead lamp in the living room was on. Everything seemed normal. I walked over to the light switch near the door, planning to turn off the light and head to bed. I flipped the switch down. The light went out, but something else changed. My ears felt strange, as if the room had lost some of its usual sound. I could still hear traffic outside and the low hum of the refrigerator, but they seemed muted, like pressing my palms over my ears. At first, I thought the bulb had died in a weird way, or maybe I was more tired than I realized. I turned the light back on. The brightness came back, and the sound of traffic and the refrigerator hum returned to normal. I frowned and looked around. Everything looked okay, but I noticed something subtle. The coffee table in front of my couch was maybe half an inch to the left of where I thought it had been. My heart started beating faster. I could see the imprint in the carpet where it had rested earlier. Now it didn't line up. I turned off the light again. This time in the darkness, I noticed the doorframe seemed off. It looked like it was set back just a fraction of an inch. I could see less of it in the dark. I reached out to run my fingers along the wall, and it felt slightly different. There was a gentle curve near the corner that I hadn't felt before. It wasn't major, but I could feel it. I turned the light on again, and the door frame looked normal, except now the side table next to the door was a bit turned, not completely parallel to the wall. I stood there, breathing slowly, trying to calm down. I checked my watch. It was late, but I wasn't that tired. I decided to test it again. I turned off the light. Darkness filled the room. It felt thick and uncomfortable. My ears started picking up strange sounds. Not words, exactly, but muffled voices. They were low and distant, like people talking in another room with a closed door between us. I blinked several times, trying to let my eyes adjust. I thought I saw movement near the baseboards. Something small and dark was on the floor, sliding or crawling. I moved slowly, reached out with my foot, and touched nothing. I turned the light on again. The voices stopped. The floor was clear, but now the bookshelf looked tilted. The top shelf books weren't lined up neatly anymore. My heart pounded harder. I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't like it. I walked around the apartment, touching the furniture, checking for loose floorboards, hoping to find a simple explanation. Everything was solid. I turned off the light once more. This time I tried to keep my eyes shut and just listen. The moment the darkness settled, I felt like the air got heavier. My breathing felt harder. I kept my eyes closed, not wanting to see anything. I heard faint scraping sounds against the wall near the kitchen. I heard more of those distant voices, but they still didn't form real words. I heard a soft tapping under the window. I could feel my palms getting sweaty. I opened my eyes. The darkness was so thick that I couldn't see the outlines of my furniture. I fumbled for the switch and turned the light back on. Under the light, my apartment felt normal again, except my couch seemed slightly angled now, not straight against the back wall. I reached behind it and felt that the gap was now larger. I was sure it hadn't been like that before. I pushed it back in place, but it took more effort than usual, as if the floor was now sloped. I paced around the room. I looked outside through the window. The streetlights were steady and the cars looked normal. I turned off the overhead light and switched on a small lamp on the side table. The small lamp gave off a warm glow, weaker but steady. The room felt stable. No weird sounds. Everything looked okay. I turned that lamp off and tried the overhead light again. The moment I hit the switch, darkness swallowed the room completely. It was deeper than normal darkness. My eyes did not adjust. It felt like a closed box. I listened. This time I heard soft breathing near the corner by the door. It wasn't my breathing. It had a slight rasp, inhaling and exhaling quietly. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't move. I waited, holding my breath. After a few seconds, I reached carefully toward the switch again and turned the light back on. The breathing stopped. There was no one there. But now the rug in front of the TV stand had shifted about an inch, and the TV stand itself seemed a little closer to the floor, as if its legs had shortened. I tried to think of something rational. Maybe I was imagining these shifts. Maybe there was some weird electrical problem in the building. But that didn't explain the voices or the breathing. I needed more proof. I grabbed a roll of tape from a kitchen drawer. I placed small pieces of tape on the floor around the coffee table's legs, marking their exact positions. I took a pencil and marked a light line on the wall at the level of the bookshelf's top corner. I memorized the alignment of the rug pattern with the TV stand's feet. I turned off the overhead light again. Immediately, I heard a soft scraping across the ceiling. I looked up. I couldn't see anything. The darkness pressed against my eyes. My breathing got faster. I tried to move slowly, inching toward where I knew the coffee table was. I kept my hands out in front of me, palms open. I felt something brush against my knuckles. It was soft, like fabric. I pulled back. There should have been nothing in front of me. I tried again. I reached out and my fingers touched something like a smooth surface, maybe wood or plastic. It slid away under my touch, making no sound. I pulled my hand back again. I felt sweat trickle down my back. I could feel my heart thumping hard. I reached for the light switch and turned it on. The coffee table was still in front of me, but now the tape marks on the floor didn't match its legs. It had shifted about a half-inch to the right. The bookshelf line on the wall was now off by a fraction. The books looked slightly crooked. The rug was bunched up a little. Everything felt subtly wrong. I sat down on the couch, keeping the overhead light on. My throat was dry. I looked at the closed door to the hallway. Maybe I should leave the apartment, but something told me I needed to understand what was happening first. I decided to try something else. I grabbed my cell phone and turned on its flashlight. Then I turned off the overhead light, holding the phone's beam out into the darkness. The phone's flashlight cut through the dark, showing me the furniture. It looked normal under the beam. I could see the coffee table, the bookshelf, the TV stand, all in the positions they had been when the light was on. But as I moved the phone's light across the room, I noticed that outside the beam, things seemed to shift. If I focused the beam on the couch, it stayed put. But in my peripheral vision, the corner near the door seemed different, as if the door frame was at an angle. I quickly swung the flashlight beam over there, and with the light on it, the frame looked normal. I heard a quiet scraping sound under the coffee table. I moved the flashlight down. Nothing was there. But the sound kept happening off to the side, always just outside the beam. I tried to catch it, but it always stopped when I aimed the light. After a minute of this, I felt dizzy, so I turned the overhead light on again. Now the marks on the floor were useless. Everything had moved slightly. My apartment didn't feel the same. The walls seemed a bit off, like the angles weren't perfect anymore. I pressed my palm against one wall and leaned my weight into it. It felt solid. I pushed the coffee table into the tape marks, aligning it again. I straightened the rug. I fixed the books. I tried to restore order. I decided I had to try something else. I turned the overhead light off, but this time I did it in short intervals. Off for 2 seconds, then on. Off for 2 seconds, then on. I did this repeatedly, watching carefully. Each time I turned it off, I heard quiet sounds like shuffling feet or whispering voices. Each time I turned it back on, the furniture misaligned a bit more. The changes were small, but they added up. After several tries, the rug was almost half a foot from where it started. The coffee table was turned at a slight angle. The bookshelf leaned against the wall differently. The TV stand looked shorter. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I realized I was disturbing something by doing this. I sat down again. I tried to think of a way to fix this. I wanted to avoid any abstract reasoning, so I focused on what I could do. I pulled the curtains closed and tried turning off the overhead light with the curtains drawn. The result was the same. The darkness felt thicker than any normal darkness. There were always small sounds and faint voices that never turned into words. There was always some movement at the edges of the room that I couldn't pin down. When I turned the light back on, the room would never return to exactly how it was. The differences were small but constant. I walked around the apartment with all the lights on, checking every corner. The bedroom was still normal. The bathroom looked fine. The kitchen cabinets were closed and aligned. The problem seemed centered in the living room. I tried leaving the overhead light on and using just the small table lamp. That didn't cause any shifts. The room stayed stable as long as the overhead light was on. But the moment I turned that one off, the strange effects came back. I began to feel shaky. My mouth was dry, my breathing was shallow, my legs were tense. I tried leaving the apartment. I went out into the hallway and turned off the overhead light from outside. I held the door open a crack and peeked in. It was dark inside. The hallway lights were on behind me. I could see a sliver of the living room floor. I heard the voices again, but they sounded more irritated now, like low grumbling. I saw movement along the floor, like shadows shifting quickly. I snapped the light back on from the hallway switch. Peeking in, I saw the furniture had shifted again. The coffee table was now closer to the couch. The corner of the rug was folded up a bit. I stepped back inside and closed the door. I tested the walls. They were still solid. The floor wasn't soft, the furniture was real. I sat down and rubbed my hands on my thighs. I needed to calm myself. I decided not to turn off that light again for a while. I kept it on and waited, sitting quietly, watching for any changes. Nothing happened with the light on. Everything stayed still. After about an hour, I got up and tried something different. I took a screwdriver and tried tightening screws on the bookshelf. They were all solid. I measured the floorboards with a measuring tape, trying to confirm if the apartment was shifting physically. Everything measured the same each time. The changes only occurred when the light went off. I wrote down the exact position of each piece of furniture in a small notebook. Then I turned off the light again, counting to 5 before turning it back on. When I turned it back on, I compared my notes to what I saw. Everything had moved by small amounts. The coffee table legs were off by a few millimeters from their marked positions. The bookshelf angle was slightly different. The rug had a new fold. I repeated this process several times, and each time, the apartment lost a small fraction of its original alignment. After maybe 10 tests, the living room looked strange. The angles of the walls felt wrong. The furniture positions were all crooked. Even the floor felt uneven under my shoes. I tried pressing my foot against the floorboards, checking if they were loose. They seemed fine. I crouched down and ran my hand across the rug. The fibers felt normal. I touched the table legs. They were solid wood. Everything felt real, yet it all looked off. I realized that every time I brought the darkness, something inside that darkness changed my environment. I never saw it directly. I only caught glimpses of movement or heard faint breathing. My heartbeat stayed fast. My palms were clammy. I kept swallowing to clear my throat. I didn't want to see what would happen if I kept at it. I decided to leave the overhead light on for the rest of the night. I took a cold shower, keeping the bathroom light on. I felt tired and nervous, but I didn't want to sleep in the dark. I left the bathroom light on and the living room light on. I tried sleeping on the couch, facing the door, with my phone in my hand. I didn't close my eyes for long. Whenever I did, I felt like something would move again. I stayed awake for hours staring at the room, waiting for some movement. Nothing changed with the lights on. Eventually, near morning, I got up and looked around one more time. The apartment still looked skewed but stable. I checked the front door and the window, making sure they were locked. I noticed my reflection in the window, dark circles under my eyes, shoulders tense. I felt a heaviness in my chest. I knew that I couldn't solve this by myself. I considered calling someone, maybe an electrician or a neighbor, but I couldn't imagine how to explain it. I also didn't want to turn off the light again. I thought about leaving and never coming back. But my stuff was here, and I needed a place to live. I decided I would wait until sunrise, let natural light fill the room, and see if that helped. Maybe with daylight, I wouldn't need the overhead light. Maybe I could rearrange everything and restore some order. I sat on the couch facing the window with all the lights on, waiting for the first sign of morning. I didn't know what would happen the next night, but I knew I wouldn't be turning off that switch again anytime soon. I noticed the frame on a Wednesday morning. It was hanging on the wall above my couch. I did not recognize it. It had a thick, gold-colored border. The edges looked clean, polished, and expensive. It had no glass. There was nothing inside, only a deep, black surface. I stood in front of it and stared at it, trying to remember if I had brought it home, or if someone else had come in and hung it there. My door was always locked. The windows were closed. No one had my keys. I did not see any signs of forced entry. I could not recall seeing the frame the night before. I remembered watching TV until midnight, then going to bed. The wall had been empty. Now the frame was there. I touched its surface. It felt smooth and cold. I tried to lift a corner of it, but it was fixed to the wall. I tried to push the edge. It did not move. I spent several minutes checking the rest of my apartment. Everything else seemed normal. The kitchen appliances were where I had left them. The bathroom door was shut as I usually left it. The bedroom had no signs of disturbance. My wallet and phone were on the small table by the couch. The door was locked from the inside. I returned to the frame. I leaned in. I could see my reflection faintly. I saw my eyes, my nose, and my mouth, but the reflection was dim. Behind my reflection, there was only darkness. No details. I decided to leave it alone. I had work that morning. I got dressed, had coffee, and left my apartment. I tried not to think about it during the day. I avoided looking at my phone when I got texts. I ignored calls. I did my work, ate lunch, and came home in the evening. The frame was still there. I examined it again. Still no picture, no photograph, no painting. Just a black background. I tried tapping it. It made a dull sound. I stood on a chair and looked at the top edge. I found no hooks or wires. It seemed to merge with the wall. The next morning, I noticed something unusual inside the frame. It was not just black anymore. There were faint shapes inside. They looked thin and irregular. I leaned in close, inches from the surface. These shapes moved slightly. I could see slow shifts in their positions. They formed patterns that changed without any sound. I tried to focus my eyes. It was hard to tell if these shapes were flat or if they had depth. They reminded me of twisted branches or narrow hallways. They seemed to stretch backward into darkness. Later that day, after coming home from work, I switched off the lights in my living room and used a small flashlight to see if the frame's interior would reflect the beam. The beam did not reflect. It disappeared into the blackness. I reached out with my hand. I stopped when my fingertips hovered in front of the dark surface. I felt a slight chill. I could feel a weak current of air, as if a draft was coming from inside the frame. I smelled something stale, like an old basement or a closed cellar. I heard a soft rustling sound. I held my breath and listened. There were low whispers. The voices sounded distant and metallic. I could not make out words. I stood there, holding my flashlight, feeling my heart beating hard. I felt sweat on my palms. My breathing got faster. My mouth felt dry. I backed away and turned on the lights. The whispers stopped. I tried to convince myself that it was my imagination, but that night I woke up twice. I thought I heard movement in the living room. When I got up and checked, there was nothing except that frame. I stood in the hallway and pointed a flashlight at it. The surface looked empty. I did not approach it closely. I felt uneasy. My legs felt shaky. I stayed awake until morning, sitting in my bedroom, listening. The next day, I came home early. I did not turn on the TV. I pulled a chair close to the frame and sat down. I wanted to see what it would do if I watched it without distraction. After a few minutes, I saw changes again. The black interior seemed to shift. The shapes inside moved slowly, gliding in silence. I noticed a dim glow deep inside. It was not bright. It had a grayish tone. I leaned forward. The air around my face felt cold. I felt my hair move slightly, as if a breeze came from inside. I gritted my teeth and held my breath. I heard those whispers again. They were more distinct now. They had a slight echo. It felt like standing near a hollow pipe that carried distant voices. I did not look away. I tried to see what was moving inside. After some minutes, I noticed a shadowy form drifting in the darkness. It had no clear shape. It did not look like a person. It looked like a mass of shifting darkness. It moved back and forth. It never left the boundaries of the frame. I tried speaking to it. My voice sounded thin in the silent room. I said hello. I asked if it could hear me. I got no answer. The whispers continued, but they never addressed me directly. They sounded random and faint. I got up and tried to pull the frame off the wall. I grabbed the edges with my fingers and pulled. It would not budge. I tried sliding a flathead screwdriver behind the frame. The tip did not go far. There was no obvious gap. The frame felt like it was part of the wall. I hit it with my palm. I felt a slight vibration, but no damage. I considered smashing it with a hammer, but something held me back. I felt nervous about damaging my wall. I also felt a strange reluctance, as if harming the frame would cause something worse to happen. I walked away and sat on the couch. My hands were shaking. My forehead felt sweaty. I turned on the TV to distract myself. I left it on for hours. Around midnight, I muted the TV and listened. I did not hear anything unusual. I got up quietly and approached the frame again. The darkness inside looked the same. I could not see the shapes. The air felt normal. I sighed and went to bed. Over the next few days, I kept my routine. Work, then home. Each evening, I would check the frame. Each time I would see those subtle movements inside. Sometimes the whispers were clearer. Sometimes they were softer. Once, when I leaned in close, I heard what sounded like my name. I jerked back. I felt my chest tighten. My shoulders were tense. My neck felt stiff. I tried to calm down by focusing on simple actions. I drank water, cleaned the dishes, and tried not to think too much. I avoided looking into the frame late at night. One evening, I decided to test the depth. I took a long wooden spoon from my kitchen. I held it in my right hand and slowly reached into the frame. I expected the spoon to hit the wall behind the black surface. Instead, the spoon sank into darkness. I felt no resistance. It disappeared from view. Only the handle was visible in my hand. I pulled it back. The spoon was intact, but the surface had felt odd. There was a slight tug, as if something tried to hold on to it. I tested this again. The second time, I pushed the spoon in deeper. I felt a gentle pull. When I pulled it back out, the spoon's surface felt cold and damp. I touched it with my fingertip. It smelled musty. My heart pounded hard in my chest. I put the spoon down and wiped my hand on a towel. I understood now that it was not just a frame. It was a passage or a window. There was space inside. There was air flowing out. There were voices. Something moved there. I felt panic rising inside me. I walked in circles around my apartment, checking my front door and the windows. I considered calling someone. I picked up my phone but realized I did not know who to call. The police would not believe me. Maintenance staff from the building would be puzzled or think I was lying. I decided to keep quiet. I did not want to invite anyone else into my apartment. I felt ashamed and confused. I tried covering the frame with a large blanket. I pressed the blanket against it and pinned it at the edges. The blanket bulged inward slightly, as if drawn by a weak current. I stood back and watched. The whispering sound was muffled but still present. After a few minutes, I saw the blanket move inward. It shifted slowly. I pulled it back and saw the frame's dark interior again. I had a feeling that nothing would stop it from existing there. Covering it did not help. I tried ignoring it. For 2 days, I did not approach it closely. I avoided looking directly at it. I kept the TV or music playing. I tried sleeping in the bedroom with the door closed. I blocked my ears with earplugs, but I still felt something. My stomach felt tense. My neck was stiff. I woke up with sore muscles. My jaw hurt from clenching my teeth. At times, when I passed through the living room, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. On the 5th day after I first found the frame, I decided to try a different approach. I took a flashlight, put on a heavy jacket, and approached the frame again. I held the flashlight close to the black surface. I pushed it slowly forward. The flashlight passed through. Its beam vanished. I could not see where it ended up. I pulled it back out. It was cold and had a faint smell of old metal. I tightened my jacket around me. I felt the cold air again. It blew gently against my face. My cheeks felt numb after a few seconds. My eyes watered. I leaned in and listened closely. The whispers sounded more organized now. I could pick out a few words in a low voice. I heard my name again. Then I heard something that sounded like an invitation. I heard the words "come in" repeated twice. My throat tightened. I forced myself to speak. I said I did not want to go inside. My voice sounded shaky. I gripped the jacket sleeves and stepped back. The whispers did not stop. They became softer but did not fade. I took a broom and tried pushing it inside. I wanted to feel the surroundings inside. The broom's handle entered easily. I moved it around. I felt empty air. I did not feel a wall or a floor, just open space. I pulled it out. The handle had scratch marks and moisture on it. I rubbed the handle with a rag. The scratches did not vanish. They looked thin, like marks from something with rough edges. I did not know what else to do. I tried talking to the frame directly. I asked what it wanted. I asked where it led. I got no direct answer. The whispers continued as before. I felt alone and trapped with this strange thing in my apartment. I could not remove it. I could not break it. I did not want to leave my apartment and abandon everything I owned. But each day I felt more anxious. I slept badly. I ate very little. My head ached. My hands trembled sometimes. One night, I stood in front of the frame and said out loud that I wanted it gone. I pressed my palm against the cold darkness inside. I felt pressure against my hand, like a weak vacuum. I pulled back. I sat on the floor and tried to think of a solution. I decided to try sealing that section of the wall with boards or a large piece of furniture. I dragged a heavy cabinet from the bedroom. I pushed it against the wall, covering the frame. I placed heavy boxes on top of it. I hoped that would block the breeze and the sound. For a moment I heard the whispers grow louder, then quiet down. I waited. I did not hear anything for a while. I kept the cabinet there all night. I stayed awake in my bedroom, listening. The apartment was silent. In the morning I checked. The cabinet was still in place. I moved it slightly and peeked behind it. The frame was still there. The darkness remained. But for now, I did not hear whispers. I saw no movement. I backed away and left the cabinet where it was. I stopped trying to understand it. I stopped testing it. Instead, I tried to go back to my old routine. I went to work. I ate normal meals. I watched TV in the bedroom. I ignored the living room as much as possible. I avoided looking at that wall. After a few days, my nerves calmed down a bit. My sleep improved. My hands stopped shaking as much. Sometimes I still hear soft murmurs late at night. Sometimes I feel cold air under my door, but I do not go back there. I do not try to look again. I keep the cabinet in front of it. That is all I can do right now. I do not have an explanation. It just appeared, and I cannot remove it. I keep living here, careful, trying not to let that thing draw me closer. It is there, and I am here, and I want to keep it that way. I woke up a little before 3 in the morning with a dry throat. It happened often since I started going to bed late and eating heavy dinners. I wanted a glass of water, so I got up from bed, walked down the dark hallway, and headed for the kitchen. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't like the way artificial light made my eyes sting at that hour. I passed through the living room. On the small table by the couch, there was a framed photo of me standing at the edge of a cliff. It was from a trip I took about a year ago. I had placed it there a few days ago because I rearranged some furniture and wanted to remind myself of that day. It was a normal photo. Me in a green t-shirt, jeans and boots, squinting in the sun with a rocky landscape behind me. Nothing special. That night as I passed by, I glanced at the photo without thinking much. My eyes felt heavy, and I just wanted water. Still, I noticed something that made me stop. The background in the photo did not look like that rocky place I remembered. Instead of the bright sky and distant horizon, I saw old stone structures. They had collapsed walls and chunks of rock spread around. There was green moss on the stones. The sky in the picture looked gray and dim. I thought maybe I was still half asleep, so I leaned in closer. I didn't see the original background at all. I saw a place I never visited. I didn't say anything. I just stared, confused and a bit tense. Then I shook my head and went to the kitchen, got my water, and came back. I looked at the photo again, and it was back to normal. The rocky landscape and blue sky were there. My eyes were stinging and I was tired. I told myself it was just a trick of my mind. Then I returned to bed. The next night, I tried to ignore the weird feeling in my chest before going to sleep. I lay in bed, watched something on my phone, and tried to relax. I woke up again around the same time, maybe a bit later, craving water. I walked through the living room once more. This time I decided to look directly at the photo. I didn't rush. I walked right up to it. I didn't turn on the lights again. I let my eyes adjust. At first I saw nothing strange. Then I leaned in and my breathing got faster. The background was now different again. The ruined stones and moss were back. I saw a few broken arches and piles of rubble. Everything looked old and damp, as if it had rained recently. But that wasn't the worst part. I looked at my face in the photo. My eyes appeared darker, and the area around them looked sunken. The skin under my eyes looked shadowed and hollow. My expression didn't match what I remembered. In the original photo, I was smiling a bit. Now I looked tired, almost sick. My eyebrows were slightly down. I stood there, my heart pounding. My mouth felt dry again. I didn't touch the frame. I just stepped back and stared. I thought maybe I needed light. I turned on a small lamp in the corner of the living room. I blinked a few times and looked again. Everything looked normal now. The old photo I knew, my normal face, the original background. I felt a heaviness in my chest. I wanted to convince myself I was imagining it, but I knew something was off. On the third night, I decided to test it. I didn't drink too much before bed, but I still woke up thirsty. I had avoided looking at that photo all day, pretending everything was fine. When I entered the living room, I felt a shiver on my arms. I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to the photo and looked. The background was different again. The ruins looked even clearer now. The stones were wet and there were dark patches on the ground. It looked like mud or damp earth. My image in the photo was no longer smiling at all. My mouth looked closed and tense. My eyes looked even darker, as if there were no clear whites, just a kind of dim reflection. My heart pounded and I could hear a slight ringing in my ears. I wanted to remove the photo from the frame and check if someone had played a prank. I reached out and touched the frame. It felt normal, just a wooden frame with glass. I tried to open it, but the back panel was stiff and wouldn't budge easily. I didn't want to break it and make noise. I kept trying a bit, but it was stuck. I felt sweat on my forehead. I backed away and went to the kitchen. I drank water and returned. When I came back, the photo showed the normal scene again. I turned on the lights and stared at it for a long time, but it stayed normal. During the day, I tried to act normal. I went to work. I tried not to think about the photo, but my hands felt slightly shaky when I typed on my computer. I went to the bathroom more often, just to splash water on my face. My muscles felt tense. When I got home that evening, I looked at the photo in daylight. It was normal. I pressed the sides of the frame, trying to find a hidden latch or something. I didn't find anything. I thought about taking a picture of it with my phone, but decided to wait until nighttime. Maybe I could catch it in the act. That night, I woke up again. I walked down the hallway. I felt my heart beating harder as I approached the living room. I turned on my phone's flashlight and aimed it at the frame. I saw the ruins again. The background was not what it should be. The building looked larger now. I saw a faint shape of a doorway in the background. There were no doors, just open space. The stones looked rough and covered in spots of green. The sky behind was still gray. My image in the photo looked older. The skin around the eyes looked stretched. The eyes themselves looked too dark. There was a slight twist in the mouth. It wasn't a smile or a frown, just some tension in the lips. My stomach tightened. I brought my phone closer. The frame's glass reflected a bit of my own face outside the picture. I snapped a photo with my phone. When I looked at my phone's screen, I saw the original scene in the snapshot I took. My phone showed the normal photo, the one from my trip a year ago. I aimed my phone at the frame again. To my eyes, the frame still showed the ruins and the strange version of me. But my phone saw the normal version. I felt dizzy. I breathed through my nose, trying to calm down. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Nothing changed. I turned on the ceiling light. The framed photo became normal. I felt my hands trembling. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, came back, and stared at the photo under the light for several minutes. It remained normal. I turned off the light, waited in the dark, and looked again. The image changed back to the ruins and the strange figure. My breathing got shallow. I turned on the light. It returned to normal. Light on. Normal photo. Light off. Strange photo. I repeated this a few times, and it stayed consistent. I put the frame in a drawer and closed it. I waited a minute, then opened the drawer in the dark. The weird version was still there, inside the closed drawer. I turned on the light inside the hallway. I opened the drawer again, and it returned to normal. This pattern made no sense. I felt a tightness in my chest. I felt a small ache behind my neck. I didn't know what to do. I left the frame on the table and returned to bed. Over the next few nights, the image in the dark continued to evolve. I saw more details. My figure in the photo kept changing. My clothes looked older, more worn out. My face looked grim. My hair looked damp, as if I had been standing in rain. The background ruins looked larger, as if I were standing deeper inside them. I could see cracked floors, broken pillars, and dark corners. When I stood close to the frame in the dark, I got the impression that the figure inside the photo was looking at me, not just staring forward. I couldn't prove it, but it felt that way. I noticed the hairs on my arm standing up when I approached the frame. I noticed my mouth getting dry. I started taking more water bottles to my bedroom, trying not to leave the room at night. But I always woke up very thirsty anyway. It felt like I had to go see that photo, like something was pulling me there. One night I brought a flashlight and shined it right on the frame. Even a direct beam of light restored the normal photo. Darkness brought the strange one. I tried covering the frame with a towel. When I peeked under the towel in darkness, I saw the weird version again. I tried placing the frame in a closet, behind boxes, and closing the door. When I opened it in darkness, it was still changed. Light remained the only thing that made it look normal. I considered throwing the frame away, but I didn't do it. I just stood there, pacing around my living room, not sure what to do. My throat felt scratchy, my arms felt weak, and I had trouble sleeping. The sound of the fridge humming in the kitchen made me jump at times. Every small noise bothered me. I started thinking I should test something else. I placed other photographs in the same spot, but they didn't change. Only this particular frame and photo changed. I changed the frame once, placing the photo in a new frame. It made no difference. The photo itself changed. The frame was irrelevant. The problem was with that photograph. I remembered the day I took that photo. It was sunny. I was on a trip alone. I stood on a cliff and asked a stranger to snap a photo of me. There was nothing unusual about that day. I tried to find something on the back of the photo. I peeled open the frame carefully during the day. The photo paper looked normal, just a standard printout. I smelled it. It just smelled like normal photo paper and a bit of dust. No marks, no stains. I put it back and told myself I was overthinking it. Another night I woke up sweating. It was humid. I tried to stay in bed. I tried to ignore the dryness in my throat, but I couldn't. I got up and walked slowly. I wanted to see if anything new would happen. I walked into the living room without turning on the lights. My eyes adjusted to the darkness. I saw the photo again. My figure in it had moved closer to the foreground. I saw my face clearly. The eyes looked hollow, with dark rings around them. My lips were pressed together. There was mud on my boots, dirt on my clothes. I saw smudges on my hands. The ruins behind me looked like an old hallway with collapsed walls and a broken ceiling. Some wet vegetation hung from the edges of the broken stones. The place looked silent and cold. I leaned in. I heard a muffled sound, very faint, like a distant shuffle. I looked around my living room but heard nothing else. I pressed my ear closer to the frame. I stood there holding my breath, my ear maybe an inch from the glass. I heard a soft crackling like small stones shifting. I jerked back and almost dropped my phone. My heart raced. I felt a prickling sensation in my spine. I wanted to leave the room immediately. I turned on the lamp and the sound stopped. The photo was normal again. I turned off the lamp. The weird image returned, and this time I heard nothing. Maybe I imagined the sound. I became very anxious during the day. I couldn't focus. I tried to talk to a friend about it, but I only said I had trouble sleeping. I didn't want to sound crazy. My skin felt clammy when I thought about the photo. I tried ignoring it, but at night I kept waking up. It happened like clockwork, always around the same time. I started keeping a large bottle of water by my bed. Even that didn't help. I felt compelled to go to the living room. I wasn't sure why. I felt a pressure in my chest if I tried to stay in bed. I got headaches. I tossed and turned until I gave in and went to look at the photo again. Each time, the photo showed a clearer version of that strange ruin. My figure inside it looked more worn, more tired. One night I noticed a slight change in posture, as if the figure was leaning forward, raising an arm slightly. The clothes looked damp and dirty. There were patches of dark green on the floor and stones. I noticed the figure's mouth was slightly open now, the lips parted enough to show the edge of teeth. I leaned in close, but I kept my distance from the glass. I didn't hear anything this time. I just felt a strong nervous tension in my stomach. My breathing was shallow. I had an urge to turn on the lights, but I stayed still for a moment. My throat hurt from dryness. I forced myself to swallow. I wanted to see if anything else would happen. After a minute, I stepped back and turned on the lights. The photo was normal, and I felt my muscles relax slightly. On another night, I came prepared. I brought a flashlight and my phone. I turned off all lights and approached the photo. I looked closely. The figure in the photo had one hand raised, palm facing the glass. The expression on its face looked strained. The eyes still had that darkness inside them. I felt a knot in my stomach. My breathing was shaky. I turned on the flashlight. The image returned to normal. I turned it off. The weird image returned. I spoke quietly to myself, just random words, trying to calm down. I reached out and touched the glass. It felt cold. I tapped it lightly. I waited. Nothing happened. The image stayed the same. I tapped again, a bit harder. My fingertip felt numb. I stepped back. I lifted the photo from the table and turned it around in the darkness. It looked normal on the back. I put it back down. When I looked at it again, the figure's arm looked slightly lower, as if it moved while I wasn't looking. I felt a surge of tension in my chest. I turned on the flashlight again, breathed heavily, and waited until my hands stopped shaking. I decided I had enough of this. The next day, I grabbed the photo and put it in a box. I taped the box shut and put it in the closet. I left it there all day. At night, I woke up again, still thirsty. I told myself not to check, but I felt that pressure in my chest, the dryness in my throat. I opened the closet door in darkness. I opened the box and pulled out the frame. The ruins were there again. The figure's head was tilted slightly, looking straight at me. I saw moisture dripping from the stone walls behind it. I felt panic building in my legs. My muscles felt weak. My mouth was so dry it hurt. I closed the box and left it in the closet. I turned on the light. I stood there breathing fast. I left the house that night and went for a drive. I stayed out for an hour. When I returned, I went straight to bed and tried not to think about it. The next morning, I took the box out and threw it in the trunk of my car. I drove to a storage unit I rented for old junk. I put the box inside. I locked the unit. I came home and felt no desire to check for it. I drank water calmly. I slept without waking up in the middle of the night. I didn't feel that dryness in my throat. I didn't feel that pressure in my chest. I left the photo locked away, out of my home. I never brought it back. I still remember what I saw each time I looked at that photo in the dark. I remember the shape of those ruins, the moss, the damp stones, the strange figure with my face, changing a little each night. Now it's somewhere else, locked in a unit, surrounded by other boxes. I keep my home well lit at night. I drink water before bed. I try not to think about it. I don't look at photos in the dark anymore. I keep my eyes forward. I try to sleep through the night. I remember the first time I noticed it. It was around midnight and I was in my living room with all the lights off. I had turned off the TV about 20 minutes earlier. I was tired, and I wanted a quiet moment before going to bed. I heard a strange sound outside, something low and uneven, like heavy breathing behind the glass of the sliding door. I stood up and walked over, feeling a slight tension in my neck. I looked through the window. I couldn't see much at first, just the outline of my porch. There was a shadow there, a shape I didn't recognize. It stood near the railing. It looked like a twisted figure, not tall enough to be a regular person, but not short enough to be anything else. The shape seemed to lean forward as if straining to get closer. I squinted, pressing my face against the cold glass. I tried to focus on the details, but the darkness outside was thick. I could only tell that it had a bent posture and a vague outline like a person with distorted limbs. The air felt colder. My arms and shoulders felt a slight chill that made the hairs on my forearms stand up. I heard a scrape of something against the wood of the porch. I couldn't tell if it was a hand or a foot or something else. I stepped back a bit and felt my jaw tighten. I breathed through my nose and tried not to make a sound. I wasn't sure if it could see me. I felt that if I turned on the porch light, I might lose sight of it, or maybe it would vanish. I wanted to confirm it was real. I moved slowly, my socks sliding silently on the floor. I reached the wall switch. I flipped it up, and the porch light flared on. I pressed my face to the window again. The shape was still there, but now I could see that it was darker than its surroundings. The light didn't reveal any detail. It stayed a black silhouette, edges trembling as if the outline itself was unstable. I caught a faint movement like shallow breathing. The shoulders rose and fell, uneven and irregular. Sometimes it stopped for a few seconds, then started again with a soft wheezing sound. I knocked on the glass. I didn't know why I did that. Maybe I wanted it to react. It turned its head slowly. There were no eyes that I could see, but I felt its focus shift toward me. My chest felt heavier. I took a step back. My heart was beating faster. I noticed my hands were getting cold. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. I stood there, unsure what to do. I went to my couch, grabbed my phone, and came back to the window. I dialed my neighbor's number. It rang a few times before she answered. I whispered, trying not to lose sight of the shape. "Hey, can you look at my porch for a second?" I told her I saw something strange. She sounded annoyed and a bit tired, but she said she would check from her window. I watched the shape while waiting. It kept breathing in that unnatural rhythm. My neighbor called back a minute later. She said she saw nothing. She saw my porch light on, my chair, my small table, but no one there. I pressed my forehead against the glass and looked carefully. The shape was still there. I felt my stomach twist. I told her I was sure someone was outside. She insisted that she saw nothing, maybe a shadow. I told her to hold on. I turned off the porch light and looked again. I could still see that outline. The neighbor said, "I still see nothing." I thanked her and hung up. I stood in the silence of my living room. I looked down at my chest. I was breathing faster now. My hands trembled a bit. I put the phone down and considered calling the police. But what could I say? That I saw a shape that no one else could see? I decided to wait and watch. I took a step closer to the door. I placed my hand on the cool glass. The shape didn't move at first. Then I saw it tilt forward, closer to the door. Its form pressed slightly against the other side of the glass. I could hear a faint scratching noise like nails running gently over a hard surface. I pulled my hand away. My pulse was racing. I glanced at my door lock. It was locked. I tried the handle gently to confirm. Yes, it was secure. I stood still, listening to that breathing. I noticed something odd. The wind outside seemed to pick up every time the shape breathed in, and it seemed to die down every time it breathed out. The trees behind the porch rustled in sync with that pattern. When it paused, the air went still. When it resumed, the wind returned. I stared at it, trying to understand what was happening. I had no logical explanation for what I was seeing. I decided to try something else. I turned on more lights inside my house. I wanted to see if more light would help me see it better. I flipped on the kitchen light, the hallway light, even a lamp in the corner. The living room was bright now. The window reflected some of my interior. I pressed my face close to minimize reflection. The shape was still visible. It never vanished. It just hovered there, shifting slightly, as if testing how close it could get. I leaned forward and spoke quietly. "What do you want?" I expected no response, but I got one. A rough voice, low and strained, seemed to push through the glass. It said my name just once. It dragged the syllables out, making my name sound distorted. I felt my legs weaken. I took a step back and grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. My mouth felt dry. I tried to think straight, but I just kept focusing on the voice. How did it know my name? Its tone reminded me of someone struggling to speak through cracked lips. There was no echo, no warmth, no emotion. It was just a sound forcing out my name. I shook my head and cleared my throat. I told myself that I couldn't just stand there. I decided to call someone else, a friend who lived a few blocks away. I grabbed my phone, paced away from the door, and called him. He picked up and I spoke in a low voice. I told him I saw something on my porch. I said I needed him to come over and confirm I wasn't going crazy. He sounded unsure, but he agreed to come by. I paced around the living room, keeping an eye on the window. The shape stayed right there. While waiting, I tried to distract myself. I checked the lock on my front door. I checked the windows. They were all locked. The temperature in my living room felt normal, but every time I got close to that window, I felt a chill. My skin prickled. The breathing outside never stopped. It was steady now, in and out, in and out, each breath followed by that synchronized shift in the wind. I also heard a faint creak, like the porch boards were bending under some subtle weight. About 10 minutes later, I saw my friend's car headlights pass by the front of my house. I heard him knock on the front door. I opened it quickly, motioning him inside and closing it behind him. I locked it again. He noticed my tension and asked what was going on. I led him to the living room and pointed at the window. "Look at the porch," I said, keeping my voice quiet. He moved closer and narrowed his eyes. He said he saw nothing. I turned off the inside lights again, leaving only the porch light on. I asked him to look carefully. He still saw nothing. He told me I might be seeing things. I insisted that I could see it perfectly. I described it to him, explained the way it breathed, the voice I heard. He stared at me, concerned. I became frustrated. I told him to wait. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and tried to film through the window. On the phone's screen, I saw nothing but my porch. I zoomed in, moved the camera around, but no shape appeared. I lowered the phone and looked directly at the porch again. The shape was still there. It never moved away. I felt the weight in my chest again. I showed him the video. He said there was nothing there. I realized this thing wasn't showing up on camera. My friend said he didn't know what else to tell me. He offered to step outside and look from the porch itself. I was hesitant, but I agreed. I unlocked the door and slid it open a few inches. The cold air rushed in. I felt a pressure against the door, like someone gently pushing from the other side. My friend gave me a strange look. He could feel the resistance too. He tried to open the door fully. It stuck as if blocked by something soft but firm. After a moment, he managed to push it open. I looked outside. The porch was empty. Just the wooden floor, the railing, the chair, the table. No shape. The air outside was still. I took a step out behind him, feeling exposed. We stood there, checking every corner. He turned around and said, "Look, there's nothing here." I nodded, but the moment we stepped back inside and closed the door, I saw it again. It was right where it had been, only now it pressed closer to the glass. I felt a spike of adrenaline rush through my limbs. My friend turned to me and asked what was wrong. I told him it was there again. He said he saw nothing. He stayed for another 10 minutes, trying to calm me down, telling me maybe I was tired, or maybe some reflection was causing me to see shapes that weren't real. I just nodded, but my eyes stayed on that window. I watched the shape shift slightly. It raised what looked like a hand, a dark, bent limb that dragged across the glass. I heard that scraping sound again, muffled by the door. My friend gave up trying to convince me, said he had to go back home. He left through the front door. Once I was alone, I locked everything again and stared at the shape. I felt my stomach knotting up. I had no idea what to do. I tried calling the police non-emergency line. The woman on the phone sounded skeptical, but she said she would send a patrol car to pass by. I waited, heart pounding. About 20 minutes later, I saw red and blue lights reflect on my walls. The patrol car stopped outside. I heard an officer knock on my door. I told him what was happening and pointed at the porch. He shined a flashlight through the glass. He said he saw nothing out of the ordinary. I insisted it was there. He stepped out onto the porch with his flashlight and checked thoroughly. Nothing. He came back inside, said everything was clear, and left. Now I was alone again. The shape remained in my sight. Its breathing sounded closer. I noticed the air was now colder near the door, and my teeth started chattering. I sat on the couch, facing the window, and tried to think of a plan. I rubbed my hands together to warm them. I tried ignoring it, focusing on my own breathing, but I could still hear it out there. It tapped the glass a few times, softly. I considered leaving the house, maybe sleeping at a motel, but I didn't want to run. I stood up, walked to the window, and spoke firmly. "Go away." I tried to keep my voice steady. The shape responded with a slow, strained breath and said my name again, dragging the sound out even longer this time. I jumped back, heart pounding hard. I shut off the porch light again, hoping darkness would hide it. It was still visible as a darker outline. I approached the window, careful and slow, and raised my hand. I stopped just short of the glass. I could feel cold radiating from that spot. I could smell something stale, like old damp air, drifting from the small gaps around the doorframe. I swallowed and backed away again. Hours passed like this. I paced around, checked the time on my phone repeatedly, and tried to sit still, but I kept getting up and returning to the window. Each time it was there, waiting, breathing, shifting slightly. Sometimes it angled its head as if trying to peek inside. Other times it pressed closer, causing the glass to make tiny creaking sounds. I never saw a face or eyes, just that outline and those unnatural movements. The wind outside never returned to normal. It stayed tied to that breathing pattern. I tried to stay awake until morning. My body felt tense and sore. My neck was stiff from leaning forward, and my forehead felt clammy. Around 4 a.m., I noticed that the shape seemed less defined. It became harder to see. The breathing grew quieter. I stood close, watching carefully. The shape faded and reappeared in slight flickers. It seemed to struggle to remain visible. It jerked and twitched. I heard softer scratching sounds, weaker than before. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The breathing was still there, but it sounded strained, like it was forcing itself to remain in that spot. By 5 a.m., the sky began to lighten slightly. I could see a pale glow behind the trees. The shape flickered more often. I noticed that it would vanish for a second, then return, each time looking less stable. I watched, barely blinking. My eyes burned with exhaustion. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I leaned against a wall to steady myself. At around 5:30 a.m., the shape sank lower, and I saw the outline shudder violently, as if the air itself was pushing it away. It tried to stay, pressing against the glass, but it got weaker. Eventually, it disappeared. The porch looked normal again. The air felt warmer. The sound of my neighbor's car starting up for her early shift reached my ears. Everything was normal outside. Just the empty porch, the quiet street, the early light making the dew on the railing shine. I waited a few minutes to see if it would return. It didn't. I touched the glass door. It felt normal. My breathing slowed down. My arms felt heavy with relief and exhaustion. I flipped off the lights, walked to my bedroom, and sat on the bed. I didn't know what that thing was or why I was the only one who saw it, but it had been real enough to shake me. I just sat there, rubbing my face, waiting for my heart to slow down. I listened to the quiet sounds of morning. The shape was gone, at least for now. I felt stiff, tired, and shaken, but I was still here. The night was over. I felt a sharp chill along my neck the moment I stepped through the cabin door. The sun was halfway down when I arrived, and I remember the quiet pressing in around me. I had left my apartment in the city to escape the noise. I had wanted isolation. I had wanted a place where I could sit without hearing car horns, neighbors shouting, or any of the constant hum of modern life. This cabin seemed right. It was old and in the middle of a forest far from the main road. It looked stable enough. It had a small kitchen, a wood-burning stove, a simple bed. The walls were solid logs. The roof looked sturdy. There was a small window in the front and a slightly larger one in the back. I saw no immediate signs of trouble. It felt quiet and empty, and that was all I needed at the time. I unpacked my bag on a rough wooden table near the front door. I placed some canned food, a few bottles of water, a lighter, a flashlight, and a thick sweater. I noticed a hatch in the ceiling that led to a small attic. I ignored it. The first night, I just wanted to settle in. I moved my sleeping bag to the corner of the room near the stove and lit a small fire. The inside smelled like old wood and dust. When I got the fire going, the smoke went up through a narrow metal pipe. It hissed a bit, but nothing unusual. I sat there, eating a can of beans, staring at the walls. That was when I noticed the carvings inside. They were not obvious at first. They were rough shapes cut directly into the wood, and the wood had darkened with age. I saw what looked like patterns of lines intersecting at odd angles. Some of the shapes looked like eyes, but not symmetrical. Some looked like hands with extra fingers. The longer I stared, the more I noticed patterns inside these shapes, as if someone had spent a lot of time scraping at the wood. I touched them with my fingertips. The grooves were shallow but consistent. No paint, no color, just carved lines. I shrugged it off. The cabin was old. Maybe some previous occupant had tried to decorate it. That first night I fell asleep listening to the forest. I heard wind in the trees, small animals moving around outside. The cabin was cold, so I curled up in my sleeping bag and kept the fire going. At some point late in the night, I woke up. I was not sure what time it was, but it was dark. The fire had mostly died down, leaving red embers. I heard something on the roof, a soft scrape against the wooden shingles. I listened, holding my breath. It sounded like a branch dragging back and forth, but there was no wind. The sound was too soft, too controlled. It lasted a few seconds, then stopped. I waited, my heart beating faster. After a while, I convinced myself it was nothing, and tried to go back to sleep. I did not sleep well. In the morning, I woke up feeling a bit on edge. The sunlight came in through the window, making long stripes on the wooden floor. My back hurt from sleeping on the ground. I got up and rubbed my neck. I turned around and looked at the walls again. I froze. The carvings had changed. I was sure of it. The shapes were slightly different, as if someone had added a new line here or changed the angle of a mark there. I ran my fingertips over them. The wood felt the same, but I could not stop myself from feeling uneasy. These carvings were not random. They seemed to form a strange set of symbols. I could not read them. They had no meaning I could recognize. Still, I tried to ignore it. I went outside. The forest around the cabin was quiet. I walked for a bit, looking at the tall trees. The ground was covered in brown leaves and damp soil. I planned to gather some firewood. I knelt down and picked up a few broken branches. When I looked up, I saw something that made my scalp tighten. There was a tree with a pattern in its bark that looked like a twisted face. I could see two depressions like eye sockets and a split in the bark that looked like a mouth. I stepped closer, expecting it to be my imagination. But the pattern was real. The bark had unusual ridges that formed these shapes without any doubt. The eyes seemed aimed right at me. I turned away and breathed through my nose, trying to stay calm. As I kept walking, I noticed more trees with odd patterns on them. Some had knots in their wood that looked like eyes. Others had tangled branches that formed strange outlines. I kept hearing a light rustling in the leaves overhead. At first I thought it was birds or squirrels, but the sounds did not match the movement of any animals I saw. I never saw a single bird. I never saw a single squirrel. The forest seemed empty of normal wildlife. Just the wind and those strange shapes. By midday I was back in the cabin. I tried to ignore the weird feelings and focus on practical things. I organized my supplies. I made a small lunch. I boiled some water on the stove. I checked the door latch and the window frames. Everything looked fine. I sat down and listened. No sounds, just silence. But as the afternoon went on, I started feeling a pressure in my chest. It felt like the air was heavy. There was no obvious smell, just a slight dampness in the air. The walls with their carvings seemed to be watching me. I got up more than once to run my hands along them. They felt still, solid, but each time I noticed a slight difference, a line that had not been there before, a curve where there had been a straight line. It was small changes, but they were changes. That evening I prepared for another night. I lit the stove again, ate another can of beans, and tried to relax. I checked the attic hatch. It was closed. There was no ladder, just a trapdoor with a simple wooden handle. I pulled it down and peeked. There was a small space up there. I shined my flashlight. I saw dusty rafters, a bit of old straw, and some spider webs. Nothing else. I closed it and tried to forget about it. When night came, I heard the noises on the roof again. This time it sounded like something small crawling around. I got up quietly, holding the flashlight. I did not know what I expected to do. If it was an animal, maybe I could scare it off. I opened the front door a crack and shined the beam of light outside. I saw the roofline. Nothing there. No raccoons, no birds, nothing. Yet I kept hearing it. A soft scraping, slow and steady. I closed the door and locked it. My heart was pounding. The sound lasted maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. In the silence that followed, I thought I heard a low whispering noise. It was too faint to understand. It sounded like a distant voice. I stood there shaking, trying to keep my breathing steady. I told myself I was just tired and hearing things. The next morning I woke up feeling drained. I barely slept after that noise. I looked at the walls again. The carvings were more complex now. They covered more area. There were shapes that looked like twisted letters, but I could not recognize the alphabet. They reminded me of scratches made by an animal's claws, arranged in patterns. I felt like these patterns were spreading. I decided to go outside and take a longer walk, maybe find the road again. I walked for over an hour in one direction. I kept track of the sun and the terrain. I expected to reach the dirt road that led to the cabin, but I found no road. I tried another direction. Just more trees, more strange patterns in the bark. I began to sweat. My throat felt dry. I tried to remain calm. I walked back to the cabin, guided by the sound of the small stream I had passed earlier. When I finally got back, I noticed fresh marks on the doorframe. They looked like tiny scratches arranged in a row. My stomach flipped. I could not explain how they got there. I spent the afternoon looking around for any sign of someone else. I found old footprints near the back of the cabin, but they were faint. They might have been mine from the day before. I knocked on the attic hatch again and opened it. Nothing had changed there. I considered leaving, just grabbing my stuff and trying to follow the stream until I found something. But I hesitated. I had chosen this place to escape the city. I wanted quiet. But now I felt trapped between curiosity and fear. I sat down at the table and tried to clear my head. I listened to the wind outside. I heard leaves rustling. It sounded like voices, but very quiet, like a muffled conversation that I could not quite catch. I tried to ignore it. By evening, the air inside the cabin felt heavy again. I lit the stove and tried to keep it bright and warm. I noticed as the light flickered, the carvings seemed to move. When the flames shifted, the shadows made the lines on the walls jump and change. I did not want to look at them anymore. I felt my jaw clenching. My shoulders were tense. I tried to concentrate on simple things. I sorted my cans of food. I counted my bottles of water. I checked my flashlight batteries. It was a stupid routine, but it kept me busy. Later that night, I heard the scraping on the roof again. This time it was louder and more deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and stood beneath the attic hatch. I thought maybe something was crawling inside there. I pulled the hatch open and shined the light in. Still nothing. Just dust. I closed it. The noise stopped after a few moments. Then came the whispering. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened. It sounded like 2 or 3 voices speaking at once in a language I did not understand. The words were soft and fast, almost humming. I felt my scalp tingling. I stepped back and tried to calm my breathing. My mouth was dry. I stared at the floor. After a few minutes, the whispering faded, replaced by silence. The next morning, I checked the walls again. More changes. It was clear these carvings were not random. They formed rows and rows of strange symbols now. They were concentrated near the door and windows. I touched them. I half expected to feel wet paint or fresh sawdust, but they were smooth and old, as if they had always been there. My head hurt. I went outside and tried to breathe fresh air. The forest looked different. The trees formed strange shapes overhead, their branches twisting together like woven fingers. The leaves rattled softly, and I thought I heard them making a sound like a whisper. I stood still, listening, trying to figure out if there was a natural explanation. Maybe the wind was catching the leaves at just the right angle. But no, the leaves seemed to form syllables. I could not make sense of them. I felt a knot in my stomach. I walked deeper into the woods, looking for any landmark. The ground was damp. My boots left marks. The trees creaked softly. After about 20 minutes, I saw a large rock formation. I climbed onto it to get a better view. The forest stretched out in all directions. I saw no clearing, no road, no sign of anything human. Just an endless line of trees. I shouted. I just yelled a long, angry hello into the silence. Nothing answered. No echo. Just a dull hush. When I returned to the cabin, I noticed something new. There was a line of small stones arranged near the front steps. They formed a circle shape. I had never placed them there. I kicked them aside, feeling frustrated. My heart was pounding. I wanted to leave, but I had no idea which way to go. I considered packing my things and just walking in a straight line, but I was afraid I would get lost without any supplies. The cabin was at least a shelter. That afternoon, I tried to ignore everything and wait it out. I sat by the stove, lit a small fire, and stared at the floor. I avoided looking at the walls. I rubbed my arms, which were covered in goosebumps. I drank some water and ate a handful of nuts. The cabin smelled like old wood and smoke. I could hear the faint whispering outside, but I refused to listen. It rose and fell, a gentle murmur that never became clear words. I kept my head down. As dusk approached, the sky outside turned a dull gray. The inside of the cabin got darker. I turned on my flashlight and shined it around. The carvings were everywhere now. They covered every wall, the doorframe, even parts of the ceiling. I wanted to scrape them off with my pocket knife, but I was afraid of making noise. I felt like something would answer if I did that. My breathing was shallow. My legs felt weak. I realized I was sweating, even though it was not hot. That night I braced myself for the noises. They came as soon as it was fully dark. The scraping on the roof, the whispers outside the door. I sat on the floor, pressing my back against the wall. I held my flashlight in one hand and my pocket knife in the other. I knew I was not going to fight anything off with that knife, but I held it anyway. The whispers sounded closer. I heard soft tapping against the window. I pointed the flashlight there. I saw nothing but dark glass and my own reflection. I heard a gentle scraping at the door, like fingernails. I crawled over quietly and pressed my ear against it. I heard low voices. They were not angry or loud, but calm and steady. They repeated something over and over. I could not understand a single word. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the noises stopped. The forest went silent again. I waited before I moved. My knees ached from crouching. My heart was racing. I sat up, turned off the flashlight, and listened. There was no wind, no rustling leaves. The silence was complete. When the first light of dawn came, I got up and opened the door slowly. There were new scratches on the outside of the door frame. They formed a straight line down the wood. The circle of stones I had kicked aside was back, arranged neatly. The forest looked the same as before, no path out, no sign of help. I stood there, my whole body tense. I stepped outside and tried to breathe slowly. I felt like the air around me was thick, as if I could not take a full breath. I could not shake the sense that something wanted me to do something, but I had no idea what. I could not read the carvings, I could not understand the whispers. Every time I tried, I ended up feeling more confused. With no real plan, I decided to remove the carvings from one wall to see what would happen. I took my pocket knife and started scraping. The wood gave off a dry smell. I managed to cut a few shallow lines over the existing carvings. I did this for about 10 minutes, then stopped. I felt a sudden burst of pressure in my ears, like a high-pitched tone I could barely hear. I looked outside and saw that the trees seemed to lean closer. The leaves shook without wind. The whispering started again, faster now. I backed away, breathing through my mouth, my heart thumping. I realized I could not fix this by force. I sat down on the floor of the cabin and waited. The whispering outside continued, then faded. I tried to calm down. I decided I would leave at first light tomorrow. I would pick a direction and walk straight no matter what. I had enough supplies to last a couple of days. I had to try something. I could not stay here while the walls changed and the voices circled around me. That night I slept with the flashlight in my hand. I kept my ears open. I heard the scratching on the roof again, and the tapping at the window. The whispers were softer this time, but still there. I tried not to listen. I focused on breathing, on keeping my mind clear. I felt every muscle in my body tense, but I stayed still. I would not answer them. I would not react. I just waited. When morning came, I got up, packed my things, and stepped outside. The forest looked as it always did, silent and dense. I turned back to the cabin one last time. The carvings were there, the stones arranged in a circle. The whispers were gone for now. I tightened my backpack straps and started walking. I did not know if I would find the road or just more trees. I did not know if the voices would follow me, but I knew I could not stay inside that cabin another day. I had to move, even if I did not know where I was going. I arrive at my family's old property just before sunset. The building is large and old, with walls that look uneven and wood that feels damp. The windows are dusty. The roof looks stable enough, but I see a few loose tiles. I smell mold as soon as I step onto the front porch. My skin feels sticky from the humid air. There are no neighbors nearby. Everything around is quiet. I hold the key in my hand. The metal feels cold and rough. I insert it into the lock and push the door open. The inside air is stale and heavier than I remember. I see old furniture covered in sheets. I notice the outlines of chairs, a table, and a sofa. The dust makes my nose itch. I step forward and close the door behind me. I focus on my breathing. I want to understand why my family's name carries this strange curse. I want to see if these stories are true. I plan to stay here until I get answers. I walk through the entrance hall. The floorboards creak under my boots. I pull back a sheet from a large armchair. Dust floats into the air. I cough once. The smell is old paper, damp wood, and something else I can't identify. I check the grandfather clock in the corner. It's not running. Its surface is scratched. I see carved initials along the sides. They look like letters but arranged in a strange pattern. I run my fingers over them. The wood feels dry and brittle. I don't understand the symbols yet, so I continue exploring. In the next room, I find a table with family photographs. They are black and white. The people in them wear formal clothes. They do not smile. I pick one up. The glass frame feels cold. I see a man with a large mustache. He looks serious. Behind him stands a woman with tight hair buns. I know these are my ancestors, but I don't recall their names. I return the photograph to the table and notice something carved into the frame. It looks like the same kind of pattern I saw on the clock. I squint and look closer. The carving is shallow, just a series of lines forming shapes I can't interpret yet. I open a door to the left and find a small library. The shelves are full of old books. Many have leather covers. They smell like old leather and mildew. I slide one out and wipe off the dust with my sleeve. The title is in another language. The spine is cracked and a few pages are loose. I see sketches of symbols inside. They resemble the ones I saw on the clock and the picture frame. I flip through the pages. The paper is thin, and I handle it carefully. I don't recognize any of the text. I take a seat on a wooden chair. It wobbles slightly. I can hear the wind outside. I set the book down and decide to look for something else. Maybe something that can help me decode these patterns. In the hallway, I find a cabinet. Inside are old medals and coins. They smell metallic and leave a faint rust on my fingertips. One medal catches my eye. It has an engraving similar to what I've seen before. This time, I see that the shape might represent some kind of animal, or maybe a plant. I rub the metal between my fingers and realize the edges are sharp. I slip it into my pocket for later. I keep checking the cabinet. I find a small notebook with faded ink. Inside are notes on family members and events, but most of the words are smudged. I can't tell what year it was written. I put it back and move on. I return to the entrance hall and notice a staircase leading up. The railing is carved with patterns. I run my hand along it. I feel small bumps and grooves. As I climb, each step makes a creaking sound. The upstairs hallway is dim. I see old paintings on the walls. Each frame is heavy and ornate. The faces in the paintings stare straight ahead, showing no emotion. I notice that their eyes seem to catch what little light there is. I feel a chill on my skin. I open a door to a bedroom. Inside, I smell old fabric and dried flowers. The bed is large, with a canopy. Everything is covered in a thin layer of dust. I approach the nightstand. On it is a small silver mirror. I pick it up. The surface is cloudy. I wipe it with my sleeve and see my own face. I look tired. My eyes feel dry. I sigh and set the mirror down. Down the hallway, another door leads to a study. I see a desk covered in papers. I can't read most of them because the ink has faded. I find a letter that mentions my family's name and something about responsibilities. It says something about returning at the right time and facing the truth. I read it slowly, struggling with the handwriting. A strange tension grows in my stomach. I feel like there's something important hidden here. I fold the letter and place it in my pocket next to the medal. I will try to make sense of it later. Outside, the sky is getting darker. I decide to check the garden before it's completely night. I step outside through a side door. The garden is overgrown. I see statues covered in moss. The air smells like wet earth and rotting leaves. I approach one statue. It's made of stone, and parts of it have chipped away. I see more strange carvings along its base. I feel the rough texture with my fingertips. One symbol looks similar to what I saw inside. I circle around the statue and notice that someone tried to remove a piece of it. There's a crack along its side. I hear the wind pick up. The temperature drops. I feel a shiver on my arms. I look back at the house. Through the windows, I think I see something moving inside. The light is low, and the windows are dirty, so I can't tell for sure. I return inside and close the door behind me. The corridor feels darker now. I realize I haven't turned on any lights. I switch on a lamp near the entrance. Its light is weak and yellow. It makes the room feel cramped. I walk around the house, turning on a few more lamps. Some don't work. One bulb flickers. I can hear a faint buzzing sound from an old ceiling fixture. As night falls, I start to see forms in the rooms. They are pale and transparent. They stand near the walls or in corners or by furniture. I recognize some faces from the photographs. They do not speak. They do not move much. They stand there and watch me. I feel sweat forming on my forehead. My heart beats faster. My hands are shaky. I say nothing. I only watch them from a distance. They look solid at first glance, but when I focus, I see through them. They seem tied to the surroundings. They appear near items and corners that have those strange patterns. I walk slowly through the hall and try to approach one. It doesn't run away. It doesn't react. It just remains there, staring. I try to speak. My voice sounds hoarse. I ask who they are, but they do not reply. I ask what they want. No answer. I pick up a photograph and hold it up to one figure. The face in the photo matches the face of this apparition. He stands there, wearing old-fashioned clothes. I breathe through my mouth to avoid the dust in the air. My stomach tightens. I realize I need to understand those symbols. I think maybe these patterns have something to do with the presence of these figures. I recall the carved patterns on the furniture and statues. I grab the metal from my pocket and hold it next to a figure. Its eyes seem to follow my hand. I hold the letter too. The figure's head tilts slightly. I swallow hard. My throat feels dry. I return to the library and pick up the old book again. The pages rustle quietly. I hold the metal next to the sketches in the book. The shapes match. I try to link each shape to a letter in the old notebooks I found. My fingers shake as I flip through the pages. I can't focus well. I feel the weight of the silence. Behind me, I sense movement. I turn. A figure stands in the doorway. It blocks the exit. I can't see its eyes clearly, but it seems to watch every move I make. I step back, pressing my spine against the bookshelf. I take a deep breath. I decide to walk past it, to test if it will let me pass. I move slowly. It does not touch me. It steps aside without sound. My legs feel weak. I head back to the main hall and sit on a chair without a cover. My backside touches the rough fabric. I rub my temples. The silence is broken only by faint creaks of the house settling. I try to piece together the patterns. They must represent a set of instructions or a key to breaking this cycle. I recall my grandfather mentioning something about a hidden room. I stand and move to the ground floor again, checking the walls for loose panels. I tap the wood. I hear a hollow spot. I push and pry until a narrow door opens. Inside, it smells like old soil and rusted metal. I find a small chest. It's locked. The lock is rusted. I pull on it. The metal flakes off. After a few tries, I manage to break it open. Inside are more metals, old letters, and a single page with a series of symbols. This page is clearer than anything else I've found. It shows the symbols arranged in rows. Next to them are rough sketches of furniture and statues. I match some of the patterns I remember. I try to guess what this means. I think it's a guide. It might show me where to align certain objects, or maybe how to arrange the items to form a sequence. I take the page and leave the hidden compartment. In the main hall, several figures stand near the walls. Their presence makes it hard for me to concentrate. I look away from them and focus on the paper. I see instructions. A symbol next to what looks like a statue, another next to a piece of furniture. I remember the statue in the garden. I hurry outside. The night air is cool. I step carefully over tangled roots and wet leaves. I find the statue. At its base, I see a faint groove. It looks like something fits there. I take the metal from my pocket. I press it into the groove. It fits. I push gently. It makes a grinding sound. I hear a click. I return inside and look at the page again. Next, I must find a piece of furniture that matches the second symbol. It looks like a chair with a pattern on its back. I search the rooms, shining my flashlight now because I don't trust the old lamps. In one of the bedrooms, I find a chair with a carved pattern on its backrest. I kneel and feel the carving. There's a slight depression in the wood. I take another medal from the hidden chest. It's smaller. I push it into the depression. Another click. The chair seems to shift slightly, but it remains in place. I look at the page again. There's a third symbol associated with a statue inside the house. I remember a bust in the corner of the hall. I approach it. Its surface is smooth except for a small notch on its side. I take another coin-like object from the chest and fit it into the notch. This time, I hear a scraping sound behind me. I turn and see a panel in the wall sliding open. My heart beats faster. I approach the panel and shine my flashlight inside. There is a small alcove. Inside the alcove, I see a wooden box. It's not locked. I open it. Inside is a piece of cloth wrapped around a document. The document is written in faded ink. It seems to explain the origin of the family's burden. It mentions a vow and objects that must be set in the correct places to release the family from repeated visitations. I follow the instructions on the document. It tells me to place certain metals in certain spots around the house. Each spot corresponds to a symbol. I spend the next hour walking from room to room. The figures remain in the halls, corners, and doorways, watching. They do not move toward me. My breath is shallow. My neck feels stiff. I keep wiping sweat from my forehead. I place the metals one by one in the correct locations. Some go behind paintings, some fit into small cracks in the wooden panels. Each time I place one, I hear a faint sound like wood shifting or metal scraping. After I finish placing the last object, I return to the main hall. The figures stand there. I notice they seem less solid than before. Their faces blur. Their bodies fade at the edges. I hold my breath and wait. I feel the air change. The humidity seems to lessen. I smell less mold. The silence grows deeper. My muscles are tense, but I don't step back. After a few moments, I notice the figures fading. Their outlines soften until I can see the wallpaper behind them. One by one, they disappear. I stand still, watching until the halls are empty again. I walk through the rooms, verifying that I am alone. I check the garden from a window. The statue remains in place, but now the metal I placed is gone. I see no sign of the figures outside. I feel a slight breeze coming in through a gap in the window frame. I breathe more easily now. I notice my mouth is dry. I walk to the kitchen and turn the faucet. The water runs brown for a second, then clears. I wash my hands and splash water on my face. It feels cold against my skin. My hands are shaking less now. I return to the library and pick up the old book again. The symbols inside match what I saw in the hidden instructions. I realize that by arranging the metals in the correct spots, I've done something to release the presence of these ancestors. I do not feel joy or sadness, just relief that they are gone. I feel tired. My legs ache. I sit down in the old armchair and feel the worn fabric under my palms. The dust has settled again. I spend the rest of the night checking each room with my flashlight. Nothing unusual happens. The air feels lighter. The silence is just normal silence now, not heavy or tense. I think about leaving before sunrise, but I decide to wait. I lean back in the chair and close my eyes for a moment. I keep my ears open for any sound. I hear only the wind outside and the faint creaking of the old building structure. No footsteps, no whispers, no faint movements. It's just a quiet, empty house now. At dawn, I open the front door and step outside. The morning air is cool and fresh. I see the old garden with its tangled weeds. The statues stand silent. No figures appear. The house behind me is still old and worn, but it feels different. I pick up my bag, straighten my shirt, and look at the property one last time. I don't know if I have truly ended the curse. but I have done what I can. At least for now, there are no more apparitions, no more silent faces in the halls. The night passed, and I remained here facing it alone. I walk away from the property and head down the road. I feel the weight lifting with each step. My family name might still carry strange stories, but this place will not hold me anymore. I have seen what I needed to see, and I did what I could to free myself. The road ahead is quiet. I do not look back. Last night, as I tried to sleep, my bed began to move under me. I felt the mattress dip on one side as if someone had pressed a knee into it. The frame gave off a soft creak. There was no one else in the room. I kept staring at the dark ceiling and the faint outline of the wall clock. I could still hear traffic outside, distant horns and some muffled music from the apartment below. I tried not to think about what I felt, but I couldn't ignore it. My heart started to pound. My breathing got shallow. I stayed on my back, staring upward, sweating under the thin sheet. I live alone in a small, one-bedroom apartment. The walls are old, the floorboards uneven, and the furniture cheap. I've had that bed for a few years, bought it used from a guy who was moving out. It's a simple wooden frame with a cheap mattress on top. There's nothing fancy about it. I keep my clothes folded in a dresser nearby and my shoes stacked at the foot of the bed. The window is covered with a thin curtain that barely blocks the streetlights at night. It started a few nights ago. I remember lying down after a long shift. I was so tired I felt my legs ache. I turned off the lamp on the bedside table, closed my eyes, and tried to relax. After a few minutes, I felt a gentle push against my lower back. It felt like the mattress dipped down near my waist. I turned onto my side and listened. I heard a soft scraping sound like fingernails on wood, maybe under the bed frame. At first, I thought it was a mouse or something small trapped under there. But the sound was slow and deliberate. It didn't come and go. It stayed, scratching lightly, moving up and down. Then I heard a soft metallic click, like a spring releasing tension. I got out of bed, turned on the light, and looked under. There was nothing there. Dust, a few socks I had lost, but nothing else. I tried to ignore it. The next day was normal. I went to work, came back late, ate a cheap frozen dinner, and sat on the couch watching some dumb show. I didn't want to think about it. That night I climbed into bed again. Right away I felt something off. The bed frame was steady, but I could hear faint noises beneath me. I heard a kind of light tapping, maybe the sound of wood lightly pressed and released. Then the mattress shifted. Not much, just enough to notice. It felt like something pressed upward from below, pushing the springs against my back. I sat up fast and turned on the lamp. The light showed my plain white sheet, the old pillow, and my crumpled blanket. Nothing else. I knelt down, looked under again. Just dust and darkness. Nothing moved. I pulled the bed away from the wall, checked the floor. Just old floorboards. I lay back down. My stomach was tight, and my chest felt heavy. I tried to close my eyes, but when I did, I felt a slight vibration in the headboard behind me, as if something flicked it from the other side. I opened my eyes and saw the headboard shake a bit, barely noticeable, but enough that I caught it. I touched it with my hand. The wood was cool and still. My heart beat faster. I turned on my side and tried to sleep with the lamp on. After a while, I finally drifted off. In the morning, I felt drained, like I had barely slept. The next few nights were worse. Each night, the movements got a little stronger. I would feel the bed dip on one side, then on the other, as if something crawled beneath the mattress. I heard light scratching on the wooden frame and occasional squeaks from the springs. Sometimes the blanket slid off my legs without me pulling it. I'd reach down, yank it back, and the moment I relaxed, it would begin to shift again. I tried to hold it tightly, but I'd feel it tug gently from below. I started to dread going to bed. I tried sleeping on the couch. It was small and old, and my back hurt when I lay on it. Still, that night I managed to fall asleep easier, But around 2 in the morning, I woke up feeling a strange tension in the air. My bedroom door was open, and I could see the outline of my bed through the darkness. I heard a gentle creak, like the mattress shifting by itself. The sound made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it and stay on the couch. Eventually, I fell asleep again, but woke up feeling sore and tired. The next night, I decided to face it. I turned off all the lights and got into bed. I lay there in silence, ears open, eyes half closed. After a few minutes, I felt the mattress press up against my right side near my ribs. I froze. Then I heard a quiet whisper. It sounded right next to my ear, but there was no one there. The whisper was too soft to understand at first. I listened harder. It said something like, "Close your eyes" or "give in." The voice was low and breathy, as if someone stood right beside me, leaning down. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My breathing got faster. I tried to keep my eyes open, staring at the dark, but the voice kept whispering. It said short phrases like, "Close your eyes. It's easier now." And "Stop fighting it." I jumped out of bed and turned on the overhead light. My heart hammered. I paced around the room, breathing hard. I touched the mattress, pressed down on it, felt the springs. Everything seemed normal. I knelt down and looked under the bed again, shining my phone's flashlight there. I saw nothing but floor and dust. I checked the windows and the door. They were locked. I touched the walls. Solid. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling like an idiot, but I couldn't deny what I heard and felt. That night, I barely slept. The following day at work, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the voice, the movement of the bed, and the soft scraping sounds. When I came home, I left all the lights on. I ate dinner standing up in the kitchen, too restless to sit down. I tried turning on the TV to drown out my thoughts, but it didn't help. Eventually, I had to face bedtime again. I got into bed, leaving the bedside lamp on. I lay still, waiting. The bed moved again, just a little at first. The foot of the bed seemed to dip. Then I felt a slight shaking near the headboard. I heard that whispering voice very close to my left ear. It told me to relax, to close my eyes. My heart pounded, and I clenched my teeth. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the ticking of the clock. The voice kept asking me to close my eyes, to rest, to give in. I snapped. I said out loud, "Leave me alone." My voice sounded shaky and weak. There was no reply. The bed kept shifting beneath me, slow and steady. I felt a strange pressure on my legs, like a hand pressing down through the blanket. I kicked out, thrashing my legs around, and the pressure vanished. The whispering got softer, like it was moving away, but then it came back. The voice never got loud, but it was insistent. "Close your eyes. Stop fighting." I couldn't sleep that night. I just lay there, tense, until morning light came through the window. When I got up, I felt weak and dizzy. I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to figure out what to do. I tried to think logically. Maybe my bed frame was old and unstable. I checked every bolt, every joint. Everything was tight. I tried putting the mattress on the floor and lying on it. The room felt normal during the day. I heard nothing. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and some distant traffic. That night, I put the mattress back on the frame. I got into bed and waited. Nothing happened for a long time. I almost started to relax. I was on my back, staring at the ceiling, and I felt my eyelids getting heavy. Then, just as I was about to drift off, the mattress pressed up under my lower back. It felt like a pair of knuckles pushing upward, slow and firm. I jumped up, heart racing. I turned on the lamp. The moment I did, I heard a short, sharp scratching sound on the wooden frame. It felt like something was angry that I had turned on the light. I sat up against the headboard, knees pulled to my chest, shaking. The whispering started again, closer this time. I could feel the warmth of my own breath, but there was a sense of another presence beside me. The voice told me to close my eyes, to stop fighting. My head felt heavy. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. I wanted to give in, to just let myself go limp, but I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to let this thing have whatever it wanted. I slept on the couch again, but I could still sense it coming from the bedroom. The next night I tried wearing earplugs. They muffled the sounds, but I could still feel the bed moving. I tried turning on a fan, hoping the noise would cover the whispers, but I still heard them. The bed shook harder that night, enough that the headboard tapped the wall a couple of times. The tapping sound made me flinch each time. I tried putting a pillow over my head, but then I felt the blanket sliding down my back. It seemed to move in short, jerky motions like something pulling it from underneath. I started checking my entire apartment every evening. I looked in the closets, behind the shower curtain, even in the kitchen cabinets. I found nothing strange. I tried sleeping with the overhead light on. The presence didn't vanish, it just changed its approach. Instead of staying under the bed, it seemed to press down from above, making the mattress sag in places where I wasn't lying. I would feel a shift, like a body settling next to me. I'd roll away, pressing myself against the wall, but the shifting continued. By now, I couldn't remember the last time I had a full night's sleep. My eyes felt sore. My head ached all day and my nerves were shot. My hands shook when I tried to eat breakfast. My shoulders were always tight. I felt short of breath sometimes. I avoided friends and calls, too ashamed to tell them I was losing my mind because my bed wouldn't let me sleep. I tried sleeping pills one night, just some over-the-counter stuff. I swallowed them with water and lay down, determined to push through. The presence came as usual. It started with that soft movement under the mattress, then the scratching, then the whispering. I kept my eyes open as long as I could, but eventually, the pills made my eyelids heavy. I started to slip into a half-sleep. In that state, the whispering got louder. The voice repeated the same phrase over and over. "Close your eyes." I could feel my body getting heavier. Then I felt something brush against my arm like a cold fingertip. My whole body stiffened. I forced my eyes open and sat up, breathing hard. The pills made me groggy, so I staggered out of bed and turned on every light in the apartment. I stood there, blinking at the brightness, shaking with fear and exhaustion. The next day, I tried a different tactic. I got rid of the old mattress. I dragged it out into the hallway and took it down to the dumpster behind the building. I brought up a spare air mattress from the storage locker and set it on the floor in my bedroom. That night, I lay down on the air mattress with no bed frame beneath me. At first, nothing happened. I felt silly and relieved. But after about an hour, I heard a soft hiss, like a slow leak of air. The surface beneath me dipped slightly. I reached down and touched the vinyl. It was fine. Then I heard that same scratching sound, this time on the floorboards. It was right under the air mattress. I got up and dragged the air mattress into the living room, placing it on the rug. I lay down again. I listened hard. The living room was quiet. After a while, I drifted off. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of the air mattress squeaking. It felt like something pressed upward from below, creating a small bulge under my lower back. I rolled off the mattress onto the floor, my heart pounding. I stood up and looked around. The room was dimly lit by the streetlights. The couch and the TV stood in their usual places. I heard a low whisper from behind me, near the bedroom door. It was the same voice telling me to close my eyes. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment. I spent the rest of that night walking around the neighborhood. I sat on a bench, feeling like a fool, too scared to go back home. Eventually, as dawn approached, I returned. The apartment was silent. I sat at the kitchen table, drank a glass of water, and tried to steady my breathing. I was too tired to think straight. The next few nights, I tried sleeping in different spots. The problem followed me. Whenever I laid down and tried to sleep, I felt the same movements and heard the same voice. If I sat up, turned on lights, or tried to stay awake, nothing else happened. But the moment I tried to sleep, the presence made itself known. It fed on my exhaustion. It never spoke more than a few words. It never revealed anything else. It just told me to close my eyes, to give in. It pressed on the mattress, scratched at the frame, tugged at my blanket, and whispered in my ear. I still live here. I haven't found a solution. Every night I go through the same routine. I lie down, I wait, I feel the movement, I hear the whispers. I keep my eyes open until they burn. The presence grows more insistent, pushing and pulling at the mattress, rattling the headboard, scraping the wood. When I get up and turn on the light, it stops. When I lie down again, it starts all over. I can't sleep anywhere else. I've tried friends' couches, motels, even sleeping in my car parked outside. It's always the same thing. The moment I try to drift off, I feel it. Now I spend most nights sitting up in bed, lamp on, staring at nothing. My body aches, my head pounds, and my mouth is always dry. I don't know how long I can keep this up. The whispers never stop. Every time I try to close my eyes, they start again, telling me to give in, to just let go. I can't. I won't. But I don't know what to do. I feel trapped. All I know is that I'm not alone in this bed. Something else is here, and it won't let me sleep. I was standing alone near the old basement stairs with a clipboard in my hand when I first noticed something off about the reflections in the glass. I had arrived early that morning to get started on cataloging the boxes stacked against the moldy walls. The building was old and empty, and I had been assigned to go through everything stored down there. There were no other employees around. I worked here alone after the building lost its official function years ago. They just kept me on the payroll to make a record of whatever was left. I had always figured it was an easy job, just me and a bunch of dusty papers. I was not prepared for what I began to see in the corners of mirrors and old windows. I remember the first day it happened. I had gone down into the basement to look over several wooden crates. They were sealed with old nails that took some effort to pry out. Inside, I found piles of old documents and letters. They smelled musty and had yellowed edges. The ink had faded, and the handwriting looked cramped and shaky. I made a small workstation in a side room that used to be a maintenance closet. I set a lamp on a folding table and tried to organize everything by date. I spent hours squinting at old ledgers and letters. The air felt stale. I heard the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. Whenever I took a break, I walked upstairs to a hallway that had some windows facing a courtyard. The windows were dirty and I could see my reflection in the dusty glass. The first time I noticed something strange, I saw a shape behind me. It was out of focus. It looked like a figure standing a few feet away, not close enough to touch me, but close enough to notice. It moved slightly when I tilted my head. I turned around fast, but there was no one there. The hallway behind me was empty, just some old furniture covered in sheets and a locked door at the end. At first I thought it was my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the poor lighting and the old glass created a strange reflection. I ignored it and went back downstairs. I told myself it didn't matter. I had a job to do. I kept working for hours. Around noon, I carried a box upstairs to check if any of the documents matched some old index I had found. I passed by a narrow mirror mounted on a wall near a closed office door. The mirror was cracked in the corner and its frame was chipped. I caught a quick glimpse of my own face. I saw my tired eyes and the dust on my shoulders. But I also saw that shape again. It stood behind me, slightly taller than me, and it seemed like it was leaning closer. My heart started beating harder. I turned around right away. No one was there. The hallway was silent. I stood there holding the heavy box, my arms tense. I listened carefully. I thought I heard something. It was not a clear voice. It sounded like a whisper. Words I couldn't understand came from somewhere behind me, but when I focused on the sound, it faded. I walked back into the basement, breathing through my mouth to avoid the damp smell. I tried to concentrate on my work again, spreading documents on the table, reading names and dates, but my mind kept drifting to that figure. By late afternoon, I needed a break. My neck was stiff from bending over old papers. I picked up a ring of old keys I had found in a drawer. They were rusty and had small tags attached with faded handwriting. I thought I might open some of the locked doors in the building. Maybe I would find more records or a better workspace. I climbed the stairs and walked along a corridor. The floorboards creaked under my feet. The light was dim. I reached the door at the end of the hall, the one I had seen earlier. Its handle was cold and the lock seemed old. I tried a few keys. None worked. I knelt down and tried to peer through the keyhole. I saw darkness and maybe some faint shapes inside, but I couldn't make out anything clear. I stood up and turned around. In the window at the far end of the corridor, I saw my reflection. The figure was there again behind me. It looked slightly clearer now. It had no distinct features, just a pale, human-like shape. It did not move. I felt my stomach tighten. My palms felt damp. I turned around slowly this time, expecting something. The hallway was still empty. I didn't see anything unusual. There was no one behind me. I started breathing through my nose, slowly. I felt a slight chill on my neck. I thought I heard a low whisper, something like words from an old diary. Phrases that didn't make sense to me. Something about a locked room, a record of names, something incomplete. I could not catch the exact words. I tried to stay calm. I returned to the basement, picked up some documents, and tried to read them carefully. They mentioned old property records and letters between former owners. I found references to a locked hall, but no clear directions. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed the smell of mold was stronger. I rubbed my nose and stepped back from the table. I shook my head and focused on what I could see. Documents, paper, ink, dust, the bare concrete floor, shelves with boxes, a small lamp throwing a yellowish light. I heard the distant sound of a door creaking somewhere upstairs, even though I knew I was alone. That night I stayed later than usual. The fluorescent light flickered sometimes. I spread the letters on the table to look for clues about which keys might fit which doors. I had a list of about 10 keys, each with a faint letter or number scribbled on a tag. I matched some of them to known rooms. There were storage rooms and old offices. I did not know which key might open the locked hall upstairs. I decided to try them all. I grabbed the key ring and went back up to the corridor. It was quiet. The air was stale. My footsteps sounded louder than usual. I tried key after key on the locked door's handle. None fit. I felt sweat forming under my arms. I stepped back and looked around for another door. There was a narrow corridor branching off to the left. I followed it and found another locked door. I tried the keys again. One of them turned. I felt my heartbeat speed up. I opened the door and shone my flashlight inside. The room smelled worse than the basement. There were shelves with piles of documents stacked high. Many had fallen to the floor, leaving scraps of paper everywhere. I entered slowly, the floorboards creaking under my feet. My flashlight beam moved over the shelves. I saw old ledgers, journals, and what looked like personal diaries. I heard a sound behind me. It was a soft whisper, like before, but this time it seemed to be repeating phrases from the documents I had just read. My hands shook. I turned around with the flashlight raised. I saw no one, but I noticed a mirror leaning against the wall. It was an old, full-length mirror with dust on the surface. I took a few steps toward it. I saw my reflection, sweaty and tense, and behind me that shape stood again. It hovered silently. I moved the flashlight around the room. Nothing changed. The shape only appeared in the reflection. I checked behind me. Nothing. I turned back to the mirror. The shape remained there, watching me. It did not have eyes that I could see. It was just a faint outline. I felt a tightness in my chest. I wanted to leave, but I also wanted to find whatever this thing wanted to show me. It was always pushing me toward locked doors and hidden rooms. I looked around the new room more thoroughly. I found a small box under a shelf, locked with a small padlock. I tried a few keys from the ring. One of them popped it open. Inside, I found a stack of old letters. They had dates from many decades ago. They talked about a large hall in the building that was sealed off after some dispute. The letters mentioned hidden records and documents that were never sorted. I felt certain that the shape wanted me to find that hall. I took the letters with me and left the room. The hallway felt colder now. I wiped my forehead with my sleeve. I listened carefully. I still heard distant whispers. I followed them down the corridor, trying different doors. One led to a stairwell that I hadn't noticed before. I climbed it slowly, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, I reached another locked door. I tried the keys again. This time one turned and I entered a long, dark hallway that smelled of rotten paper. My flashlight beam picked up doors on each side. Most were unlocked. I opened them one by one. They were filled with cabinets and boxes. I saw my reflection in a broken window at the end of the hall. The shape stood closer now. Its whisper sounded louder. It repeated some of the phrases from the letters I had read. I recognized a few words. The hall, the records, the sealed room. I felt my skin prickling. I tried not to look at the reflection, focusing instead on the doors. At the far end, I found a large double door locked with a heavy bolt. I lifted the bolt and tried to open the doors, but they wouldn't budge. I searched around for another key or some tool. Eventually, I found a small crowbar in a maintenance closet. I returned and forced the doors open. Inside was a hall, larger than I expected. It was filled with tables covered in old files and stacks of letters. The smell of mold was strong. My eyes watered. I stepped inside, holding the flashlight tight. The room was silent except for my breathing. I moved from table to table, looking at the documents. They were property records, transfer papers, old contracts. They seemed to detail the entire history of the building. I noticed some names that matched the letters I had found earlier. I sorted through the piles, placing them in a rough order, trying to understand their meaning. As I worked, I felt that presence behind me. I could sense it watching me through the reflections in the glass cabinet doors. I heard its whispered sound. It was not speaking any clear sentence now, just bits of words. I tried not to panic. I wanted to finish what I started. I checked one set of documents that described an old dispute over the building's ownership. I saw names repeated many times, accusations, receipts, and a note about sealing off certain areas until a resolution was reached. Everything was old and forgotten. I realized that these documents needed to be cataloged and preserved properly. They were probably what I was meant to find. The figure appeared in the reflection whenever I hesitated. When I approached the exit, I saw it linger behind me. When I returned to the tables and worked, it seemed to stay still. I spent hours sorting and stacking. I felt my back ache. My throat was dry. I found no water source upstairs, so I just coughed and kept working. Eventually, I gathered a large pile of documents that seemed the most important. I carried them out of the hall and down the stairs. As I left, I glanced at the broken window. The figure was there. I stopped and looked closely. The figure did not move or react. It was just there, hovering. I turned my head slowly. Behind me, there was empty space. I looked back at the window. The figure remained. I felt a surge of tension in my chest. I told myself to keep going. I had what I came for. I made my way back to my makeshift workstation in the basement. I placed the documents on the table. I felt relieved to be back in a familiar spot. I looked at the reflection in a small piece of glass I had found earlier. Nothing appeared behind me now. The room was quiet. I heard only the hum of the fluorescent light and the distant sound of the old building settling. I sorted the documents until they were neat and labeled. I took notes on a pad. I recorded the names, the dates, the references to the sealed areas. When I felt I had done enough for the night, I stood up and stretched my arms. I walked around the basement. I checked the corridor. I looked at a window's reflection again. Nothing. I saw only my own face, tired and dusty. There was no figure behind me. The whispers were gone. The smell was still there, but I was getting used to it. I climbed the stairs and checked the locked hall one more time. Everything was in order. The documents I left there were still stacked as I had arranged them. I closed the door behind me, though I could not lock it the same way as before. I didn't see the figure in the reflections now. I didn't hear it whisper. I felt my muscles relax a little. My shoulders were less tense. I headed back to my workstation, thinking about what I would do tomorrow. I had more boxes to open, more keys to test, but now I knew what I was dealing with. I had found the hidden hall and its records. I had seen that silent presence, something tied to these old documents guiding me in its own way. It never touched me or spoke directly to me. It only appeared in reflections and hinted at what I needed to find. I shut off the lamp and left the basement. As I walked out of the building, I noticed the dark sky outside. I could feel the fresh air. I breathed deeply and wiped the dust from my clothes. I did not know if I would see that figure again. For now, I had the documents I needed. I could present them to whoever had sent me here. Maybe they would understand their importance. I walked away from the building, and I tried not to think too much. I focused on the feeling of my feet on the ground and the sound of my breathing. The night was quiet. I decided I would return in the morning and keep working. There were more records to catalog. There were more locked doors to check. I had keys. I had a flashlight. I would do my job. But I would also keep an eye on the reflections. I would remember what I saw even if I never understood it completely.